Welcome to the Science of Sports Performance, where we discuss the real science of nutrition and exercise, helping you train smarter, fuel better, and perform at your very best. My name is Ben Pressler, and I'm currently an undergraduate student at Brigham Young University, majoring in both nutritional and exercise sciences. I'm pursuing my PhD with the goal of becoming a professor of sports nutrition. Today's episode is my conversation with Dr. Akash Sehgal. Dr. Sehgal is a healthcare economist and a doctor of dentistry. He's also been a TEDx speaker, and he is the host of the podcast Dr. Washbrains, where he focuses on topics mainly relating to chronic disease and how to improve our health span and our lifespan. Dr. Sehgal reached out to me asking if I would be a guest on his podcast to discuss topics of nutrition. In the episode, we discuss a variety of topics, mainly focusing on things like antioxidants, the gut microbiome, and micronutrients that we should be consuming to have optimal health. We dive into some other topics as well, some of which I addressed to him that I did not feel super comfortable speaking on, but gave some thoughts that I did have, and he was a great host. He was very, very understanding of my not wanting to speak on things that I didn't feel very comfortable in or an expert on. However, he was very genuinely intrigued in the things that I did know and I did feel comfortable talking about. We had almost 3-hour long conversation. It was a terrific conversation. I hope you get a lot of value from it. Of course, this podcast is available on his podcast, Dr. Washbrains, but with his permission, I'm sharing it with you guys on my platform today. Unfortunately, due to a software malfunction on my end, I actually lost my side of the video for this podcast. So unfortunately, it's not a video podcast this episode. It will just be an audio podcast. He was very forgiving and very patient with my software malfunctions. Of course, I'm still learning, how to manage these big files as I am learning and creating this podcast. But he's been a great host, and frankly, we've discussed the topic already of perhaps joining again to have a separate conversation about exercise. So I hope that you guys will enjoy today's episode, and let's go ahead and get into it.
But you decided to talk about, nutrition with me. Why? What is the specific reason behind it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's actually something. So I now have a double major of nutritional science and exercise science. However, I started with nutrition only.
Wow.
As well
Okay.
as in my PhD, I really kind of want to focus more on the nutrition. Nutrition really to me is more what I want to focus on academically, just as you've said, is what I want to focus on our remarks today with you, just because I feel like, nutrition really is biochemistry. That's what it is. So many people, we all eat food, right? Lots of people have gained or lost weight and, eaten a healthy food, a fruit and a vegetable, and felt good after it. And so I think everybody out there is going to have something that they'd like to say and try and teach you about nutrition. However, they don't realize that it goes so much deeper than that. Like
Absolutely.
even just, I think everybody knows that the word antioxidant is a good thing, right? But why? I don't think most people really understand what an antioxidant is or does. And so strength training is something that I'm very passionate about. I love the physiology behind it. We could talk about how it helps you live longer because you can walk and be more mobile in your old age. But really, for me, exercise, it comes down to do something that you enjoy, do something that you're passionate about, and then just be consistent with it, right? We could hash out all these different studies and we could say, well, this training program is more effective than this. But it doesn't matter if it's more effective if it's not something you enjoy. And
Absolutely
so to
not.
me, it's just find something that you enjoy, some way that you're going to be active and some way that you're going to keep your body healthy and do it. Whereas nutrition, you can really, really get into the weeds and learn about the chemistry and how your body absorbs these nutrients and uses these nutrients and so on. And so
Absolutely.
nutrition will kill you faster, I suppose, than bad exercise. Bad nutrition will kill you faster than bad exercise.
Absolutely. I mean, no doubts over there. What are the foundations of nutrition, according to you? What makes up nutrition?
I would say most people are familiar with the term a macronutrient. It's
Yeah.
called a macro just because macro means big and you need lots of them. So that's your carbs, your proteins, and your fats. And there's different types of carbs. Of course, there's simple carbs like sugars, but then there's longer form carbs that are called starches, which are found in like, grains and bread and potatoes and things like that, as well as there's fiber is very important. So that's your carbohydrates, your lipids or your fats and your oils. Many people are scared of them, right? Because we store excess weight in our body as fat. And so many people will, hear of dietary fat and think that it's very bad for you. But fat is incredibly good for you, believe it or not. Our hormones, for example, testosterone for males, the primary, muscle hormone and things, is derived from a cholesterol molecule, which is a fat.
Absolutely.
And again, we could get into the chemistry if you choose, but we don't have to. But there's different kinds of fats like unsaturated and, you know, saturated, polyunsaturated fats, and they
Yeah.
have different effects on the human body. Some are labeled good and some are labeled bad. I'd say in moderation, the biggest thing you should control is total calories. And of course, total calories are contributed by your carbs and your fats, your lipids. And then the last one is protein. And there's really not major classes of proteins. You know, most times if you're eating protein from a chicken or from an egg or from nuts and things where you're getting your protein, it's all the same. However, proteins are made of smaller things called amino acids, and you need to make sure you get all the different varieties of amino acids in your diet, which again, all these things are stuff that we can get into in better detail if you desire. But then there's the micronutrients, and that's just your vitamins and your minerals. We are what we eat. Your body can't be made of anything that you haven't eaten in your diet at any point. And so, for example, there's iron is a component of the hemoglobin in your blood, and calcium and phosphorus are components of your bones, and sulfur is a component of your hair. If these are all minerals, and if you're not eating them in your diet, your body can't use them as part of your structure, right? So if you don't have a balanced diet, your body can't function properly. And then we have several vitamins. There's six major classes of vitamins, and A, D, E, K are fat soluble, and then B and C are water soluble. But then there's, I think, eight distinct B vitamins as well. And vitamins, it actually comes from, I think, a Greek term. It's supposed to mean a vital as an important, and then amine, which is just supposed to mean some sort of a compound in your food. Although I hear amine and I think of an amino acid, which is a protein,
Yeah.
but that's not necessarily the case. And so it's just these compounds. It's not like a mineral, but a lot of them have this very, very complex, chemical structure. But they're compounds that have been identified as if you're not getting them in your diet, you're going to experience some sort of a deficit in your health and your performance.
Got it. Sounds interesting. We will come back to the types of amino acids maybe somewhere, down this conversation. Um, you mentioned about, eating a particular amount of calories. Um, Everybody eats, everybody, it is, of course, very difficult to guesstimate, for lack of a better word, how to track your calories. I mean, even if it is by a ballpark figure.
True. So are you asking advice that I would give on how to track your calories or what a
Absolutely.
calorie is?
Absolutely. I mean, like both the things, rather.
Okay. Well, calories actually get a lot of hate on the internet, believe it or not. People will say, because the solution to weight loss is calories in versus calories out. However, some people struggle with that. Of course, different foods offer different volumes. Foods make you feel full, and some don't. Some are very calorically dense. They have a lot of calories. Some are not. And so when people struggle with weight loss, they seem to kind of think that calories is not the solution, especially when they found some other track or some trick like the keto diet.
Yeah.
Many people will say, well, calories aren't real. And the thing that people need to understand, in my opinion, is that a calorie is not a substance. I feel like that's what people get in their heads. Like when you say that there's 100 calories in some food, they seem to think that there's 100 molecules of calorie in that food. And that's not what that means at all, right?
Yeah.
But it's just a unit of measurement. And so, we track the chemical energy in our food because that's why we eat food, is so that we can take the chemical energy within the bonds of our food, and then our body can convert it for us to have energy to move and to speak. And so, it's a unit of measurement, the same as meters is a measurement of length, and seconds and hours and minutes are a unit of measurement for time. And so, but that's really the secret, is that there's the chemical energy in the food that our body uses to convert to whatever energy, heat energy to keep our body warm, and, kinetic energy to move our hands and our mouths and to breathe and for our heart to beat. This energy has to come from somewhere. And when we consume more energy than we burn in a day, our body is inept to keep that energy around. Because, in these past 100 years really is kind of the first time in human history that, the search for food has not been a challenge for many people, especially, in modern civilization at least. But, food is easy to come by, and that's why obesity has become a problem. But in the past, like if you were able to eat 4,000 calories in a day where you only burn 3,000, you were probably going to want that extra 1,000 calories for the next day when you didn't find as much food.
Absolutely. I mean, I have heard a lot of people, explain calories the way how you did it. It was beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
no, I'm serious. I mean, everybody gets lost whenever they're talking about calories. They would move into like calories, basically, like how much heat is generated and stuff like that. But you just hit
Yeah.
the right spot. Um, Now, coming down to tracking them, um, how to efficiently, guesstimate, when you have a plate of food in front of you. For example, you have your breakfast. All right. How would you land like a guesstimate of how much calories are in there, or would you rather read the label and then see at it?
Yeah, well, there's really two ways to track your food, and I actually kind of recommend them both in their own stage. And the first one, like you said, is to read the label, see how many calories the label says are in the food, and kind of track it that way. There's also lots of apps that you can download to your phone where you can just, look up the portion of your food, weigh out your food, especially is important. Weigh your portion of your food and then track that into your app or off of the label, however you'd like to do it, and then get a feel for how many calories are in the certain meal that you enjoy to eat, or how many calories you usually eat in a day. And if that's something that you've done for a long time, it's not something that I do every single day anymore, but it is something that I used to do every single day for a couple of years. And so at this point now, I know what a serving of chicken looks like, right? If I want to have a serving of chicken for lunch that's 350 calories and 60 grams of protein, I've weighed that out and measured it so many times now that I don't have to measure it out and weigh it on a scale anymore. I can cook up my chicken and know, just because I've done it so many times. And so that's actually something that I think could be very valuable for many people, is to weigh stuff and track it in an app and read it off the label so that you get an idea for what a portion is. Because many people, well, they say, I don't know why I can't lose weight. I don't know why I'm gaining weight. I only eat a tablespoon of peanut butter on my toast in the morning, right? And then if you were to weigh that tablespoon of peanut butter, it would weigh like 3 tablespoons worth. It can be kind of hard to eyeball stuff in that regard. Whereas if you've weighed it and you know what it is, eventually you're going to be better. However, the next version is intuitive eating. And I think it kind of goes more so into what you're talking about. You're looking at your plate of food. How do you know that this is going to be a good portion of food for you? How do you know how much food you're eating? And that is intuitive eating. Now, in our bodies, they have mechanisms to control how much food we eat. So in our digestive tract, there's actually things called baroreceptors, which basically is a receptor that is able to understand the amount of pressure inside of the digestive tract. And of course, if there's more food, there's more volume of food digested, there's more pressure. And then certain hormones are going to be released saying that we're full and we don't need to eat anymore. As well as at certain points in the digestive process, I think when a food meets a certain point into our small intestine, it's actually going to release a hormone that kind of turns off our stomach and helps our stomach to quiet down a little better. And so there's all these, chemicals and hormones and enzymes involved in this process for our being able to control how much food that we do eat. And so intuitively, you should know you shouldn't eat yourself until you're stuffed and you have to unzip your pants to make room for your belly, right?
Got it.
You know,
Yeah.
many people do that on holidays like Christmas time and their birthdays, and that's fine. I understand the place in that, but you don't have to eat until you're stuffed to be full. You should eat until you're satisfied. You know, your stomach isn't about to explode, it doesn't feel like, but you've had a good portion of food that's going to give you energy and things like that. But there are also some tools that will help you do that better, such as it's better to eat your vegetables first. I know many people don't like to hear that, but if you eat your vegetables first, you have this big serving of salad or broccoli or something like that. You eat that first and then you eat your protein. And then by the time when you get to your carbs or if you have some sweets and things like that, a dessert with your meal, then you're going to have a good amount of food already in your stomach and you're going to have a better perception of how much food you really can eat. And so after a little while, have a meal that you think is good. And even if you want to stop early because you feel satisfied, if you're hungry later, good. Like you can have more of that food later, but it's better to wait and find out, right? If you didn't eat enough, your body's going to tell you in an hour, let's not try and get ahead of ourselves and eat that food right now. And that can be sort of intuitive eating. So usually what I recommend, for example, like if I'm coaching a client, I'll say, work with me for this long, weigh your food for this long, get in the habits of the meals that you eat each day. We're going to have this structure laid out for you. And then after that, you're going to have way more knowledge than you used to have to be able to eat more intuitively.
That's a nice way to like handle clients and all. Beautiful. Um, so while we were talking about food and also like in general, tell me, how do you define a good source of all these macros and these micros, and and what would like some good sources be? They can be processed or natural, but yes, like what are actually good sources of macros and micros?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the three main macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, the best sources of those, carbs are going to be grains and fruits and vegetables. I actually would recommend fruits as a good carb source to people who are trying to control their body weight because they're very, very high volume and a good source of carbs. I think they're really awesome as well because they do have some simple carbs, some sugars in there. And some people are scared of those, but you really don't need to be. They can help you get energy rather quickly. And then these fruits also have a significant portion of fiber. And that fiber, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, because I want to speak to a common understanding, but fiber is not digestible. Your body doesn't absorb it into the bloodstream like it does all the other foods. And it's really, really good for your gut health because it helps feed the bacteria that are in your intestines. It helps draw water into the intestines so that the food moves through it better. So it slows down your digestion, but that is generally considered a good thing. And so it has these simple sugars, but also has these fiber along with it. And that fiber is going to help your digestion. Well, the sugar is going to give you some good energy, and it's going to be a very, very high volume food with a lot of water. However, grains and potatoes and breads are going to be a good source of carbohydrates. Fats are oils, right? So oil is found in animal products. If you're eating really any sort of animal, it's going to have fat tissue on it. And then, of course, we all know there's the fatty, juicy cuts of meat that are really good and really tender. And then there's the ones that are more lean, which is commonly going to be like fish as well as like chicken breast. The white of an egg is much more lean protein than the yolk. The yolk is fattier. And so I'm not saying that you should avoid fatty meats, right? Because that can be a good source of
Absolutely.
fat. And then, of course, meats are a good source of protein. However, something that I would like to point out as well in terms of protein is that protein is found in everything, believe it or not. Many people don't. Now, some sources are considered to be more trace, which means just smaller amounts, as well as some sources you don't get very much protein for the amount of calories that you're consuming. However, say that your goal is to eat 150 grams of protein in one day. Maybe you're getting 100 to 120 grams of protein from things like the fish and the chicken and the eggs that you're eating, your protein sources, maybe a whey protein shake that you have after the gym. Those are your big protein sources. But then if throughout the day you're having things like grains and potatoes, I love to eat oats. Some people have like nuts and beans and vegetables as well. I have broccoli every day. That's my favorite vegetable. My serving of broccoli that I eat each day, I think has 8 grams of protein in it. And so you're probably going to get 100 to 120 grams of protein from the sources of protein that you know are sources of protein. But then you're going to fill in the rest of that gap from all the other different foods that you're eating.
Got it.
Then, as we get into micronutrients, the best guideline that I can give to people who are interested in eating more micronutrients without knowing exactly what the sources are is to eat colors,
Yep.
right? So, leafy greens, dark green vegetables like broccoli and spinach, the more color something is, generally speaking, the more micronutrients it has, vitamins and minerals. However, I'd also just say try and be diverse. Like, you'd be kind of surprised if you really want to eat a very balanced diet and get all your micronutrients without supplements, you kind of need to have a little bit of everything. Are you familiar with, I mean, the food groups, the food pyramid, the
Yeah,
my plate,
absolutely. Yeah,
whatever guidelines you're given
yeah,
to eat different portions of food, of fruits and vegetables and grains and fats and dairy? Dairy has a lot of micronutrients that many people need. For example, dairy actually has a good amount of iodine in
yeah.
it. It has calcium and it has phosphorus, and sometimes it is fortified with things like vitamin D. So you can get a lot of good micronutrients from just dairy, from milk. I mean, that's not colorful, right? It's white most of the time, milk and dairy, but that can be a great source of micronutrients. However, if you're trying to get things like folate,
Yeah.
folate is one of the B vitamins. The word folate is actually related, I believe it's either a Latin or a Greek word, to foliage,
Hmm.
as in leaves. And so, an incredible source of folate are leafy green vegetables. And then, vitamin C, ascorbic acid, is found primarily in citrus, as well as some vegetables like peppers. And so, you really kind of got to, I hope you're not a picky bit of everything every single day.
Yo, sorry, I lost you there for a second, but yes, I did get you.
Oh, that's so good. I apologize.
No issues, no issues, no issues. The weather has been very bad over here, and the internet has not been on my side for the past 1 week or something. But something that can be sorted out.
D-
No, I really get your point about how you know like for example, India had a huge thyroid problem. Like our goiters, I mean, like 100 years ago, goiter used to be a thing over here. It still is.
Yeah.
So our salt actually has a lot of iodine in that. So that is one way how we guys sorted out iodine for that matter. Um, what do you think about deficiencies? Like the common nutrient deficiencies that somebody can face. Um, that too when they think that that their diet is balanced. Like for example, I'm missing out on all the reds in my plate.
Yeah.
Then for I mean it's just an example though. But yes, do tell me about deficiencies.
Yeah. Well, this is actually something that I've experienced personally and was kind of humbling for me. I like to think that my diet is perfect. A couple of years ago, as I was beginning to study nutrition, I really did kind of an overhaul in tracking what I do eat in a day, and thinking that it was going to be really, really good and really, really balanced. But then, coming to find out that my vitamin E consumption, for example, was super, super low and needed to be better. And so, if I had to think, from my experience, from people that I have coached as nutrition clients, the most commonly underconsumed nutrients, in my opinion, first of all, like I said, is vitamin E. Now, I'd say for somebody who is not trying to control calories, vitamin E is not usually a problem. Now, like seed oils and things like that are going to be good sources of vitamin E. And I mean, unfortunately, there's lots of oils and things in these, highly processed foods and snack cakes and cookies that people are eating. So believe it or not, from these Twinkies and Oreos and things, people can actually get a good amount of vitamin E. But I've noticed that whenever people are trying to control calories, which is a very good thing to do, let me get that out of there, is a very good thing to do to try to control your calories for the sake of your health. It's actually pretty likely that you're going to be low in vitamin E, as well as I think, again, across the general board of the world population, potassium is
Yeah.
pretty underconsumed because that is going to be found in fruits and vegetables primarily. I think many people, when they're trying to eat healthier, they focused first on vegetables, which is great, a very, very good thing to do. But I think sometimes people really do get scared away from fruit because of the sugar. And so that's one of the big reasons why I recommend that people consume fruit as a carb source. Like we've already mentioned, it has very, very high volumes, which keep you very full, but then also it has incredible micronutrients like potassium and vitamin C and things that we've already mentioned before. I think magnesium is pretty underconsumed just because, that's a little trickier to get your sources of magnesium. On one hand, magnesium is magnesium. And so that's great. A lot of people would be happy to eat dark chocolate, but that is not very nutrient dense because there's so many calories that come along with it. You can't, you know, get your daily's intake of magnesium just from dark chocolate and still have enough calories to be able to eat the food that you need to eat to get all these other, nutrients as well. I think off the top of my head, I would probably say those as well as iodine. I know in the United States, many people have been scared away from iodized salt, which was a huge medical breakthrough. Iodized salt was, right?
Yeah.
Because goiter is the swelling of your thyroid when you don't have enough iodine, and hypothyroidism is actually linked with weight gain and things. However, people just get this idea that iodized salt is ultra processed and bad for you, and because of that, they're scared away from eating it. And so iodine, actually, in the United States, we're seeing more and more iodine deficiency nowadays, despite iodized salt.
Wow. Something that I never thought of, never expected to, but yeah. And I mean, like, yes, you have mentioned that, that you need to make sure that your colors are there, you're eating your macros, which are in target over here, to make sure that, that your diet is balanced. Tell me something. Now, for any regular human being, a regular day is composed of like three major meals: your breakfast, your dinner, and your lunch. Is the
Yeah.
3 meals a day approach actually optimal? Is it worth it?
I would say so. Usually, what I recommend to people, I consider pretty much everyone who I meet and who I work with an athlete. My podcast is the science of sports performance, and I hope to everyone to know that sports performance doesn't just relate to somebody who plays professionally sports, but if you're exercising, if you're training for a marathon, if you're going to the gym, you're an athlete, right? And so usually for athletes, I would recommend about 3 meals and a snack. Really, it can be given up to personal preference. For a long time, I liked to do intermittent fasting, which of course is just you only eat for a small window of the day and then you fast the rest of the day. And the reason I liked it is because I did a pretty good job at fasting in the mornings. I didn't find myself to be very, very hungry in the mornings. Whereas when I got later into the evening and especially before bed, I had a lot of cravings. I wanted to eat a lot of junk food. And so for me to save all of my calories for that time of day was very beneficial for me. And that can be very, very prudent. Really find the diet that works best for you. Some bodybuilders like to eat a bunch of small meals all throughout the day because they think that that's going to keep the amount of protein in their blood high and help them build the most muscle. I mean, that's a good belief, but the science has really shown that 3 meals a day or even just 2 meals a day is going to be adequate to support your body's needs for food and for protein and for these nutrients. So I would say I mean, 3 meals a day is so common for a reason because that's usually when your body's going to get hungry. You eat a little something in the morning to, of course, break your fast overnight. So you have a little bit of fuel in your body. And then you go out and do your morning's work. Then you're going to be hungry in a few hours. Get a little more food in you to finish the day. And then in the evening, have your last meal to kind of replenish all your needs so that as you go into bed, you have all the food that you need to replenish your nutrient stores and to repair damaged tissues and to just help yourself sleep well. I'd say 3 meals is great advice for most people.
Got it. Um, Now, when I believe that that I've covered a lot over food, I want to move into hydration for a while. What role does hydration play in nutrient utilization? Like the amount of water and the absorption, maybe, or the digestion, maybe, of all the macros and micros. Not all, but yeah, in general.
Yeah. Well, I'd say one of the most important roles that water plays in the human body is that of transportation, right? So there's our body is composed of, as I discussed in my last episode, depending on the person, 50% to 70% water. So if you weigh, 100 kilos, that means in your body is probably 50 kilos to 70 kilos of water. That's a lot of water. And that water is in all of your body cells. It's flowing through your blood. And if the hydration levels of your cells or your bloodstream is wrong, it can really affect the way that nutrients get delivered to your cells and waste products get pulled out of your cells. So you need to make sure that you're properly hydrated so that the cells are able to receive the nutrients that they hope to have. So your blood volume is able to, transport that around your body. Each cell, the cell membrane, it's not the cell wall. The cell wall is only found in plant tissues, but that's just how I'll explain it. Like the wall of the cell is really, it has a very, very important job in only inviting things into that cell that are needed. So it has a huge role in keeping, bacteria and viruses out as much as possible so the cell doesn't become infected and only letting in the good things. And so even in our bodies, these important things like glucose. Let's talk about glucose. Glucose is the primary energy for the body. It's always in the blood. It needs to go to the cells so the cells have energy to use. But even that glucose to be taken into the cell, though it's so, so, so important, has a special transporter, has a special, mechanism that is required for it to get inside of that cell wall. And these water molecules, as well as electrolyte molecules, which is an important part of hydration, like sodium and potassium, play a huge role in opening and closing these little doors in the cell membrane for these nutrients to get in. So as we talk about, how does our hydration status affect the way that we can utilize nutrients? Well, the nutrients might not even effectively get to our body cells to use them if we're not properly hydrated.
Got it. Got it. Now, this might be a personal question, but yes, tell me please about coffee. The relationship between coffee and hydration.
Uh-huh. Well, so you're referencing, for those who don't know, a study that I went over in my hydration episode of the podcast. I posted one of the graphics of that study to my Instagram, and it appeared that the least hydrating beverage in this study, they compared, how much you urinate after consuming these different drinks of things like soda and things like juice and milk and plain water, as well as coffee. And it appeared that coffee was the least hydrating. Now, personally, I don't drink coffee or tea. However, it's not really about the coffee as much as it is about the caffeine content of the coffee. Coffee is really just caffeine water. And so the theory in that regard is that the caffeine in the coffee promoted diuresis, which is your kidneys filtering water out of the blood and excreting it as urine. And the reason that it would do that is because, well, caffeine affects, without getting too technical, it affects the tiredness receptors pretty much of our brain. And so there's a molecule that signals to our brain that we're getting sleepy, that prepares us for bed. And caffeine mimics that molecule and attaches that to that receptor so that the adenosine, which is this sleepiness molecule, cannot activate that receptor. So it makes us more awake. It stimulates our body to move and to feel awake. And the same way that there are those receptors in our brain, there are those receptors in our kidneys as well. And so when our kidneys feel like they are less tired because of that caffeine, they're going to filter more water and, create more urine that we are going to then excrete, which promotes dehydration. For that regard, caffeine is considered a diuretic. However, in that study, though, I mean, it was notable, it was measurable that caffeine was less hydrating than water. It didn't actually merit a statistic significance, which, for those who don't know, basically just means that there's a chance that the difference between hydration in coffee and water was random. It wasn't true. It wasn't genuine. There's a possibility that it was just random. Now, I think it was, I'm not sure the p value, and the p value is that number that tells us how random it was. I think it was very close to being significant, but it did not make that regard. So we cannot, you know, with academic integrity, say that there was a major difference in the hydration between coffee and water.
Got it. Got it. Um, mo- Moving on. About micronutrients, I believe we did touch upon vitamins and minerals and their the etymology of the names. Um, can you tell me a little bit in depth as to how do they work and why are they actually important?
Yeah. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you just add a little more context to that question? What do you would you like all the vitamins and all the minerals? Because I mean, there are lots. What would you like to focus on?
Tell me about the some like those vitamins and minerals that actually what do you call it, improve vitality or maybe longevity and are some things that are easily to miss out on. For example, let's talk about magnesium. Now, magnesium, for example, can actually like the lack of magnesium. Of course, it won't let you sleep. Magnesium glycinate is the form in which
Right.
then it's taken in and stuff like that. I mean, moving in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so then with that, I think I'll talk about briefly all of the vitamins, the 6 groups of
Yeah.
vitamins, and then I'll talk about some of the key minerals as well, if that sounds okay to you.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
first of all,
Absolutely.
vitamin awesome. Vitamin A, is a compound that is, used within, the nervous system, I'd say. So the eyes especially is what it's famous for. You know, you'll hear that eating carrots is good for your eyes. But the reason that is, it doesn't actually improve your vision the same way that wearing glasses does. However, it's a retinoid, and so that might sound familiar to you. The word retina in your eye. So these compounds are important for the formation of the retina in your eye, which allows you to pick up more visible light, and so it actually helps you see better in the dark. So vitamin A and eating carrots doesn't, make your vision less blurry as if you were wearing glasses, but it helps you be able to pick up more light in the dark. And then similarly, it's just important for, cell division and DNA synthesis in the brain and in the spinal cord and in the eyes. And that's actually why Accutane is a medication used for acne. And it is a derivative of vitamin A. And so it can help with your acne, but if you are a female hoping to take Accutane, you have to take regular pregnancy tests because Accutane and that strong amount of vitamin A can cause birth defects because of the way that it affects the formation of the brain and the spinal cord. So if you were to be taking Accutane as a pregnant woman, it can cause some pretty serious side effects to your baby. Vitamin D is another fat soluble vitamin. Now, again, the distinction is just what this vitamin can be dissolved in within the body. So, vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat soluble, which means there has to be some sort of a lipid transporter for these vitamins to transport around the body. Now, the distinction between these as well is that they are stored in the liver. Excuse me. So, if you were to eat an excess amount of vitamin A or a vitamin E or K, most people don't eat vitamin D as much as they synthesize it in their bodies, but that can be stored in the liver for future use because it's fat soluble. Whereas vitamins B and C are water soluble, which means they're stored very easily in the blood, but that also means that they are excreted very easily in the urine. And so that can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's good because if you consume excess B vitamins, which is very common, if you look at energy drinks, for example, and B vitamin supplements, sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of percent of the RDA of the vitamin B that you need. And so it's good. You can pee that right out. It's not going to affect you in terms of toxicity. Whereas something like vitamin A, it's good because your body can hold on to a little more and store it for future use. However, the other side to that is that it can actually cause toxicity if you eat too much. And he's moving on to vitamin D. That is our next fat soluble vitamin. The primary role that vitamin D plays in our body is the maintenance of the levels of blood calcium and phosphorus. So that's incredibly important for our bone development. However, it doesn't just manage calcium and phosphorus by putting it into the bone to make our bones stronger. However, if your blood calcium and your blood phosphorus is low, it will actually take the calcium and phosphorus from your bones. It can, deconstruct your bones to get more calcium and phosphorus. But that balance is very important. If you have too much calcium, it can lead to the calcification. This is forming of tough, hard, like rock-like structure of calcium on your internal organs. It can be very, very bad for you. So vitamin D and the regulation of that calcium and phosphorus is very good for your bones, as well as phosphorus is incredibly important as we talk about DNA, right? It's also incredibly important as we talk about ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That is the energy currents of our body. And so we need those phosphate molecules for our energy balance and things like that. So it plays a very, very crucial role in that. Now, one thing that I will say is that vitamin D is supposed to be this health hormone, right? You'll hear that a lot online. Vitamin D, the higher vitamin D you have, the higher testosterone you have and things like that. And I believe that I kind of do believe that the vitamin D is going to help you, be very healthy and well rounded in those regards, hormonally and things like that. However, the science has not created a clear link as to why that is. Now, I wonder personally if it might be sort of a correlation as opposed to causation, because we know that our body can synthesize vitamin D in response to UV light exposure on the skin. And so perhaps the UV light and the exposure to sunlight does something, perhaps the visible light does something to our circadian rhythm that helps us have higher testosterone, or perhaps there's some other mechanism of why we are, you know, developing better testosterone levels if we are exposed to sunlight or vitamin D. I believe that, but that is speculation. And that's something that I just hope to make clear. It's not a well-formed link, but there is a lot of belief that vitamin D can relate to your hormones and the synthesis of that. Vitamin E is an antioxidant, and that's really all it is. Antioxidants, we've already mentioned this before. Many people don't even know what that means, but as our body goes throughout the day, as cells divide and cells die, molecules are broken apart, there are these molecules called free radicals. And all that is any sort of a molecule that is missing an electron. And so it has a positive charge on it, and it goes floating around the body, trying to steal that missing electron from any tissue that it possibly can. And so vitamin E actually plays a special role in the cell membranes. So sometimes a free radical will steal an electron from a molecule that makes up the phospholipid bilayer of a cell membrane. And then that one reaction causes a chain reaction that almost like unzips that cell membrane and just destroys the whole thing, because one electron has been stolen. And so that one steals one from its neighbor and steals it from its neighbor and steals it from its neighbor. And then the whole cell membrane can kind of fall apart in that regard. And so that's why they put vitamin E in like skin creams and lotion, is because it's believed that it can maintain the health of the cell membrane and help you have better skin. But an antioxidant has that extra electron. And so it has a negative charge. And so it can give that electron away to that free radical. But then because that electron that it had was extra, both the free radical and the antioxidant now have a neutral charge. They're at peace. Nobody's going to try and steal anything anymore. And so it neutralizes that free radical and prevents it from causing any further damage within the body. That's what vitamin E does. And then lastly, vitamin K. Actually, the reason it's called vitamin K is because it comes from a Danish word for clot, as in to clot the blood. And so if you've ever gotten a cut, your blood is going to form a scab, a blood clot in there. Vitamin K is necessary for the synthesis of these clotting factors in our body. And then lastly, vitamin B and C. Now, vitamin B, like I said, there's several subclasses of vitamin B. Some of them, they used to be called vitamin B1, B2, so on. Now, many of them are being called by their name. I believe off the top of my head, it's thiamine,
Yeah.
riboflavin, niacin, biotin, pyridoxine, pantothenic acid, folate, and cyanocobalamin. If I miss one, darn it.
I
But
doubt it.
there's several
Yeah.
subclasses, and basically, if I could put that all in a nutshell, the B vitamins are responsible for metabolism. So, especially as you've been talking to me about, you've been interested and asked several questions about how does this or that affect the way that our body can utilize the nutrients in the food that we're consuming. If your levels of B vitamins are too low, that in a huge way is going to affect how your body can utilize this food. So as your body, breaks apart the carbohydrates that you eat, for example, there are enzymes that help that, as well as it needs to cap off the ends of those molecules that it's now cut in half. And these B vitamins play a huge role in these enzymatic processes, as well as in the formation of certain enzymes. It's really, we could do a whole 3-hour podcast on the B vitamins alone because
Absolutely. Yeah.
there's so many hundreds of reactions that these plan. And frankly, I wouldn't call myself expert in them because there are so many.
Yeah.
However, B vitamins, again, in a nutshell, are very, very important for your energy, metabolism, the breakdown, and the utilization of certain foods. And then lastly, vitamin C has, well, a couple roles that's very, very cool. But one thing that I always like to tell people, because it goes so much against what many people have been taught and learned, but vitamin C is not used in the immune system. Or I misspoke there. I shouldn't say that. It is used in the immune system, but vitamin C does not increase immune capacity. So many people, when they have a cold, they have a runny nose, they're out sick for the day, they will take incredibly high amounts of vitamin C. They'll take special vitamin C drinks because they have this belief that excess vitamin C causes your immune system to work in excess. It causes it to work even better, and that's not the case. But what vitamin C does, it's two main purposes. The first one is that it is an antioxidant as well, just like vitamin E, and we've talked about that. It has that extra electron to donate to a free radical. And so for that purpose, it is a part of the immune system in this regard. There are white blood cells in our bodies whose job is to locate and destroy pathogens, viruses, and bacteria that are not wanted in our bodies. And there are certain white blood cells that actually destroy whatever virus or bacteria it is by the means of free radicals. So they find this virus and they release free radicals at it, like shooting it with cannons. And then those free radicals will dismantle and destroy the bacteria or the virus. However, if we don't stop there, the free radicals could go on to destroy other things. So these white blood cells have vitamin C in them, so that vitamin C can then act as the antioxidant to cancel out those free radicals, and so that no more damage will be done to the body. And so in that regard, vitamin C is a part of the immune system. However, that does not mean, unfortunately, right? It would be so cool if you could take vitamin C and get over a cold faster, but excess vitamin C is not necessarily going to help your immune system work better. Now, the other primary form or function, I should say, I apologize. The other primary function of vitamin C is in the formation of collagen. Collagen, when I say collagen, think connective tissue. So there's collagen in our skin to help it be elastic and strong and not be brittle. There's collagen in our bones so that our bones can actually have a little bit of bend in them before they simply snap. Collagen, again, think connective tissue. That's not exactly right. It's components of connective tissue, but collagen, think connective tissue. And collagen is a protein. And as we've talked about, a protein is like a big long chain. And these links in the chains are amino acids. that are all just connect with each other and make this big long chain. Collagen is 3 different amino acid chains that are twisted together like a rope. And that's what allows them to be kind of elastic and very, very strong. And without vitamin C, the different amino acids within this chain are not able to create that twist. And so with vitamin C, we're able to create that twist, turn these amino acids and these protein chains into collagen. And so we're able to have healthier hair and healthier skin, healthier bones, and healthier joints.
Beautiful. I mean, yes, the whole thing about vitamin C, yes, it's true, and it's not talked about much. It's not talked about much at all. Um, Tell me, is it possible to maintain a micronutrient balance when somebody is on a vegetarian or a vegan diet, like without supplements? For starters.
Yeah, yeah. So on a vegan and a vegetarian diet, I would go so far as to say it's easier to maintain proper micronutrient balances in your body, with one exception. And that one exception is going to be the B vitamins, unfortunately. And we've talked about just now how important they are for our metabolism and the utilization of the food that we eat. However, B vitamins are very, very commonly found in meat, in animal products, whether that is, chicken or turkey or pork or beef or eggs. And so if you are a vegetarian, I would encourage you to eat eggs. Eggs are a really, really great nutrient source. If you think about it, I mean, what is an egg, right? It's literally it's a baby chicken trying to give all of the nutrients and the tools that it needs to grow. And so if you're a human who's trying to grow and maintain your body, eggs are very, very helpful. The amino acid profile of eggs are amazing. The nutrient content of eggs are incredible. Um, Very, very good to eat eggs. However, if you're a vegan and you're not going to eat eggs, that's not something that I recommend, but it's something I understand if done for ethical reasons. Of course, some people, that's their choice, and I respect that, and I hope to help them with the tools that they need to perform as best that they can. Unfortunately, I would say that if you are a strict vegan, it would be prudent to take a vitamin B complex supplement. Now, there are sources of it. I don't know great plant sources of these B vitamins off the top of my head, with the exception of folate. We've already discussed folate is vitamin B9 and is found in leafy greens, foliage, like we discussed. However, if you are a vegan, a strict vegan, it might be prudent to take a vitamin B supplement. However, with all the other micronutrients, really the best sources of them are things like beans and nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables. And so, especially as someone who is a vegan and a vegetarian, you're not just eating salads all day, right? But you're going to be consuming things like beans and lentils and nuts to try and get the protein that you need. And so as you're consuming these things, you're getting high amounts of, all these micronutrients that are so, so important. And if you remember at the start of our conversation, we kind of talked about how magnesium is a very underconsumed nutrient. Well, a great source of magnesium is things like seeds and nuts. And so I think many people who are not vegan or vegetarian don't really consume high quantities of those foods. However, someone who is a vegan or vegetarian might be consuming a lot more magnesium than the general population. That could be very, very good for them. Now, I told you that I'd speak on the role of some of these important minerals. So I guess I'll go ahead and do that.
Please.
Magnesium is considered to be one of the electrolytes.
Yeah.
So the electrolytes, which are responsible for conducting electrical impulses from our brain to our body, as well as transporting nutrients and waste products all throughout our body, are sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, and magnesium. So in one regard, magnesium is an electrolyte that plays a very, very important role in all of those, energy systems in our body as we talk about electrical impulses and action potentials and the contraction of our muscles as well as our heart, all of these important things. However, you mentioned magnesium as an implication for sleep,
Yeah.
and that is very, very true. Magnesium and frankly, many of the minerals are similar to vitamin B in that the amount of things that they do in our body is incredible. Zinc, for example, in my nutrition textbook that's just sitting right here on my desk, if you open up to zinc, zinc will tell you that it is a cofactor in 200 plus enzymes.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of all it says because there's so much to go into. And magnesium does that as well. Magnesium is very, very important for the production of hormones. And that's probably the thing that I would most like to focus on. And those hormones include testosterone. Testosterone is made primarily while we're asleep, right? So when we wake up in the morning, that's when for a man, your serum testosterone level is going to be the very, very highest because you've been producing it all night long. As well as other hormones include melatonin, which is important for the onset of sleepiness. If you're a woman, there are many, like period regularization products. Um, some of them, again, I've mentioned supplements. Some of them are kind of throwing your money away with. Some of them are very, very good. Many of these products will include something like a magnesium glycinate or a magnesium threonate because that magnesium can play a very important role in regulating your hormones. A woman's period is caused by hormones, and there's this very delicate balance of hormones, and they all go up and they all go down. And so if you don't have those tools that you need, including especially magnesium, then you're going to be in store for a tougher time. And so magnesium can be very, very beneficial for sleep and for the way that you feel because it helps you produce these hormones. And then perhaps, we've already kind of talked about calcium and phosphorus. As we talk about, high performers, the other one that I would talk about is probably iodine and iron, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So iodine is something, again, that we've already mentioned, but what it does is it helps your body produce thyroid hormone. Now, your thyroid, it's in your neck, and it really helps you burn energy efficiently, burn the food that you eat, and, the process of lipolysis, which is the breakdown of the lipids and the fat on your frame for energy. If you don't have proper thyroid hormone, it is associated with weight gain because of a decreased energy expenditure, and sort of you're not as efficient at utilizing the food that you want, the food that you have eaten, I apologize, for energy. And so for that, iodine is very, very important in maintaining your weight balance. And that's, like we've said, going to be found in iodized salt, as well as actually dairy and eggs are good sources of that as well. And then lastly is iron. So iron, its primary job is that it is found in hemoglobin and myoglobin, which are oxygen transporters.
Hmm.
So as our cells go through cellular respiration, that is the breakdown of fuels within our body to create ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that is the energy currency of our body. And well, if we don't have oxygen in those systems, then they slow down. There are things that they can do. They can ferment certain molecules. However, that is going to produce a lot of metabolites that can lead to you feeling sore. It places sort of a burden on your body to clear out those waste products so that you can continue to perform. And so oxygen is crucial. It's crucial to have oxygen if you want to be a high performer in running or weightlifting or whatever. In producing energy for your body to use, you need iron so that you can get oxygen to the cells. And it's actually very prudent to consume vitamin C as well with that iron, actually, because vitamin C is an antioxidant. You might hear that. Consume citrus along with, your vitamin, with your iron,
Yeah.
especially if that iron is coming from things like spinach and greens as opposed to meat, because, well, there's two different configurations of iron. Iron can be ferrous, which has a 2+ charge, or it can be ferric, which has a 3+ charge. And the 2+ charge absorbs better into your body and is used better. And so ferric iron can be, just the sort of iron that you get in the supplement. But or in the spinach or the whatever, if you're looking at an iron supplement, try and find something that has ferrous iron and not ferric iron because it doesn't absorb as well. But that antioxidant capacity of the vitamin C will actually change the ferric iron into the ferrous iron. And in that regard, help you to absorb it better.
Wow, this is beautiful. Oh dear Lord. Tell me something. I'm going to circle back to vitamin D over here because, I feel like
Okay.
vitamin D is a little too crucial, but then I believe we're a little short on time as well. Uh, just give me as concisely as possible, maybe like in like a five, or maybe like in a 3 minute, paragraph about that. Do you
Yeah.
think that vitamin D, like the role of vitamin D, like, has it been undermined in our present nutrition? And the way how it actually, influences our health, our overall health.
Yeah. Um, well, that's a good question. It's important. And I would say that just a sort of a disclaimer as I start this answer. Again, there's this believed link that vitamin D leads to, improved health in regards like testosterone and things like that, but it's not a sure thing. We haven't discovered exactly why or if that's really a causation as opposed to just a correlation. However, vitamin D, what it does is it manages the transportation of calcium and phosphorus between our blood and in our bones. So there are sensors in our bloodstream, and you can think of it as like a little hand, like sticking out from the wall of the blood vessel. And that hand is tracking how much calcium and phosphorus comes into contact with it. And when it's at a level that it likes to be at, that's great. We like to stay there. However, if it's getting too low, if that little hand sensor is not hitting enough calcium within the bloodstream, then vitamin D is going to play a role as that little door, that pathway between the blood and the bones that is going to then move that calcium around. So if there's too much, or sorry, if there's not enough calcium in the blood that hand is sensing, that sensor receptor, then it's going, with the help of vitamin D, that vitamin D is going to help shuttle calcium out of the bones and into the blood, and vice versa. So it's going, if there's too much calcium in the blood, then it is going to begin to shuttle that into the bone so that there's no calcification. And beyond that, there's nothing, at least in my understanding and my learning. Perhaps there is more to speak on about that topic, but to my knowledge and to my understanding, that's really all there is to say about vitamin D. Now,
You've
there is, again, belief that UV exposure and, then vitamin D in that regard improves your testosterone levels, improves your health and your well being, but it's not a well linked as to why.
Yeah, it's all potential. There is, I mean, like you said, right? Like it's all jumbled at the moment, and more research is due over there in that particular department. Uh, you mentioned about oxidants and antioxidants. There is a term that I'm familiar with, which is known as oxidative stress.
Yeah.
Can you put some light on it, and also, like, mention that how much should an average person worry about oxidative stress?
Well, oxidative stress basically is well, the more that your body is doing, the more it's metabolizing, and even the more you exercise, the more free radicals it's producing. Really, whenever molecules are broken apart, and whenever anything, pretty much everything in our body, almost every system is going to produce free radicals in some way. And so it's tricky because, for example, if you go on a really really long run or an extreme bout of exercise, we know for a fact that that generates an excess of free radicals. However, we also know that the more you exercise, the longer you live, whereas we know that the more free radicals you have, the shorter you live. And so it kind of seems backwards. And the answer to that is simply that we don't know. We don't have that very well figured out as to why, that the free radicals from exercise don't seem to affect us, or why we still live longer despite the free radicals from exercise. It's not a very well defined link. However, everything produces free radicals, and it is a leading theory as to why it causes things like wrinkles. The wrinkling of your face is because of an increased exposure to free radicals throughout your life, as well as cancer. It is a huge belief in, why cancer is caused, because those free radicals could actually damage the DNA of our cells. And then if that DNA gets damaged, it could be replicated improperly, and that could lead to uncontrolled cell growth that becomes cancerous. So, oxidative stress is everything. Every system in our body produces these free radicals, and that is oxidative stress. Antioxidants, as we have discussed, eliminates these free radicals and helps put everything back to neutral. How worried should everyone be about free radicals? Well, I don't want you to be like scared of them in excess, because they're totally unavoidable. They're totally, totally unavoidable. However, one of the most important things that people can do for their health is eat more antioxidants. Now, as we talk about antioxidants, there are some specific ones that people hear about. For example, polyphenols. A phenol is just a chemical structure. And so a polyphenol is something that has multiple of these phenol structures in the food. We hear about how they're found in things like dark chocolate, and they're found in, all these vegetables, and they're good for us. And when people discover these things, they kind of become a craze, as well as lycopene is found in your reds. So tomatoes and watermelon have lycopene. And people hear this and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to go supplement with lycopene, and I'm going to go supplement with polyphenols because they're antioxidants. They're good for me. But almost every single phytochemical that there is could act as an antioxidant in some way. So phyto means plant. So phytochemical is just a chemical found in plant. Those are the chemicals that give plants, fruits, and vegetables their color, right? Why are red onions red, and why are blueberries blue, and why are, why are broccoli and spinach green? It's because of these phytochemicals, and many of them act as antioxidants, as well as like whole wheat and whole grains. If you get a loaf of whole wheat bread, it's going to be a darker brown compared to white bread. It's going to be, of course, a very white color. That is because of the germ and the bran of that grain are going to contain phytochemicals that can act as antioxidants. Now, as you say, oh, I'm going to supplement with lycopene because it's an antioxidant. I wouldn't recommend you supplement lycopene. I would recommend that you eat the tomatoes that have lycopene in them, because there could be dozens, or there could be hundreds of other antioxidants in that tomato that we don't have a name for. We don't know that they even exist, but you're going to be eating them as you eat the tomato, and not when you're consuming this lycopene supplement. So my practical advice for everybody would be to eat whole grains and eat very colorful fruits and vegetables, because there's a very high probability that those contain lots of phytochemicals that act as antioxidants and help reduce your oxidative stress.
Beautiful. Since we're on the same topic, is there a specific quantity of antioxidants that one should be aiming for?
No, sir. It's not really something that we have quantified.
Got
And
it.
so as much as you can is the guideline,
Yeah.
right? We really classify that in number of servings of the food that contains the antioxidants. So, all these other vitamins and minerals, we have an RDA of, 100 milligrams a day you should have. Antioxidants, we don't have that for, but we do recommend that most people consume 5 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, and 5 to 9 servings of whole grains. The reason that whole grains number is so high is just because many people are going to consume lots of grains throughout their day. And so as much as you can consume whole grains, the better. And that doesn't just have to be, wheat bread in place of white bread, but oatmeal is a whole grain. Popcorn, even if you just like to snack on popcorn, that is a whole grain, regardless of whatever butter and salt you put on it. That's a whole grain. It's that outer shell and the germ, as opposed to just the starch of
Yeah.
that grain that we eat. So 5 to 9 servings of whole grains, as well as about 5 servings of fruits and vegetables or more.
Beautiful. Um, so can your antioxidants be harmful after a point?
That's a good question. We know that, too much of anything can become a bad thing. However, as As far as I know, especially if you're consuming them from food sources, I do not believe that there's been a noticed too much antioxidants. Now, as we've talked about, if you're going to buy a lycopene supplement, I might go as far as to say I don't know exactly what it would do or what it would look like, but I believe that there might be some sort of a negative to consuming too many of those lycopene tablets. But if you're going to ask me, is there any bad thing to consuming too many whole grains or too many fruits and vegetables? No. Aside from if you're eating excess calories, you could gain body fat, which we know is bad and can actually increase your oxidative stress. The more you weigh, the more oxidative stress you go under, and that can be really, really bad. That's why it's recommended to lose weight, not just for cosmetic and have a six pack that looks good, but really for your health. But I don't believe that there's really going to be any harm to consuming too many antioxidants.
On a personal note, I believe that six packs are something that are not so healthy. I don't know
Yeah, it
why.
can. It can. No, I agree. I on that topic, I know this is kind of unrelated, but a healthy body fat percentage for a man is going to be about 12%. And so if you were to step on like a bodybuilding stage at 12%, you'd probably be laughed off, although at 12% body fat, you probably have very visible muscles, visible ab separations. I mean, for context, I mean, I'm not overweight by any means. I'm not super lean. I'm probably about 20% body fat. And then I mean, like I'm not super overweight. I'm not obese. You can see my muscles all right, right? And so you could get down to probably 12% and be very, very healthy. However, you're right. When you get down to that 4 and 5 and 6% that many bodybuilders get down to step on stage, really your hormones are going to crash. There's not as much, warmth insulation. There's not as much cushion on your feet and on your joints. And there can be a lot of negatives to maintaining a low body fat percentage, especially for a long time.
Absolutely. Um, Tell me something. Can mild oxidative stress can it be beneficial for long term health? I mean, just a mild level of stress.
Right. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I will say that I don't know.
Okay.
Something that I start all of my podcast episodes by saying that I know that my current credentials are not, I don't have my PhD yet. It's probably not up to par with other podcasts, but I'm going to try and make all the information I share with you as high quality as I can. And so I guess what I'm about to say is speculative and perhaps not high quality. However, like I've mentioned, we do know that exercise, though it increases our oxidative stress and the amount of free radicals that we have, we know that it's good for us, as well as mild stress, working hard towards a goal. If you're stressed about some deadline at work, for example, that can actually be good for you because it raises your baseline for stress. And so if your baseline for what stress is a little higher, it means you're going to spend most of your life probably at a lower stress level, which means you're going to have a better blood pressure and you're going to sleep better. And so you've asked specifically about a mild amount of oxidative stress. And in that regard, I'm not sure. I don't know. However, a mild bit of stress and especially things like exercise, is a mild bit of that healthy for you? Yes, I would definitely say so.
Got it. Got it. I do I do understand the portion where you're talking about stress in general being good for the human body.
Yeah,
Because if there is no stress in the human body, it will be very difficult to remember things. It would be very difficult to wake up in the morning, stay awake, and also our flight or fight response would crash out completely.
of course.
Yeah. Um, Tell me something. Uh, what's
Yeah.
your opinion on longevity? Like, what's your take on nutrients that have, in the recent past, maybe like in the past 5 years, have come up in research, something that maybe builds the body towards being more resilient?
Yeah. I don't have anything that immediately comes to mind or at least like screams out to me.
Yeah.
However, some of the things that we've discussed already, vitamin E, for example, can be really, really good for your skin. So if your, definition of longevity is looking younger than you are when you get into your 50s and 60s, well, then yeah, vitamin E might be a good nutrient that would help you with your longevity. Antioxidant, that's what vitamin E is, as we've discussed, is just an antioxidant. So antioxidants are going to be great in that regard. However, aside from that, the thing that comes to mind is not necessarily that the nutrient is going to lead to longevity, but more so that the result of the nutrient, the thing that the nutrient helps your body do, is going to lead to longevity. And so the thing that comes to my mind is magnesium, right? We've talked about how magnesium can help with your hormones and your sleep. And so is magnesium necessarily going to cause you to live longer or age better? No. But if you're consuming a proper amount of magnesium and that's helping you sleep better, better sleep is absolutely going to help you age better.
Absolutely. I mean, like, this is possibly maybe the relationship why, like, having magnesium builds up testosterone. But again, I'm not too entirely sure about it, even from all
Right.
the research that I've read. Great. Now,
Yeah.
let's move on to the next section on um, absorption and gut health.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Because, I mean, I don't want to talk about metformin, to be honest, because it is maybe one of those things that just came and went by. And
Okay.
maybe I don't even agree with the use of metformin in anti aging because it is just very speculative. But if you know something about it, please be my guest and just let me know.
Gotcha. I don't know much about metformin.
Yeah.
Again, as an EMT and a firefighter, when I go out on an ambulance call, it is very, very common for me to run into somebody who is taking metformin as a medication. That's something that we always ask what medications they're on. And metformin, to my understanding, and for those who don't know, is just a medication. It's a multifaceted medication that helps with the management of diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes. And so, well, really, as you talk about excess body weight and the diabetes and the high blood pressure that can come from that, many of the people that I do, work on as a patient on the ambulance do have some sort of a, diabetes and high blood pressure, usually as a result of an unhealthy lifestyle. Metformin, again, to my understanding, I don't understand it super, super, super well, but it um, helps really just with your glucose regulation. So it helps your body uptake glucose from the blood into the cells. It slows down the process of your liver breaking down glycogen to create as glucose. It really just helps manage your blood glucose. So if I understood you correctly, this is not something that I've ever heard of before, but did you say that it sounds like people will take metformin even if they don't have diabetes as a means of improving their aging?
So, yes, metformin was, if I'm not wrong, researched along on rats for its effects
Mhm.
on longevity. Plus,
Right.
also metformin and semaglutide or Ozempic, both of them
Uh-huh.
do work similarly, not similarly at least, but yeah, they do work on type 2 diabetes. And
Right.
Ozempic, I mean, like, it has gained notoriety.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
that's the scene. That's the thing.
Okay. Well, yeah, um I'm glad you kind of bring semaglutide into the picture because that is something, more so that I've heard about being used in the wellness space. And um really, I mean, at the end of the day, I know this isn't a very everyone wants to hear like the strong answer, but um of course right now I'm an undergrad. I don't have my PhD yet, and even when I get my PhD, I'm a nutrition PhD. I know a lot about food, or of course I will and I hope to, but I'm not going to be a medical doctor. And so I'm not going to be able to give you the best advice on the use of metformin or the use of semaglutide. However, I understand their appeal. I do. And um, I think that if your doctor has recommended it to you for the means of regulating your body weight, I think the regulation of body weight is going to be one of the most impactful things that someone can do for their health. One of the most impactful things. It's going to lower your blood pressure. It's going to lower your blood lipids. It's going to lower your oxidative stress. you're going to be able to exercise better, move better, you're going to have better heart health. Like losing weight is incredible. And so if someone like me was to be like, oh, I'm going to take metformin and semaglutide to help, manage my blood glucose, then I think that there could be just some side effects that are not worth it to me. Usually you hear about the side effects of like semaglutide is like nausea. And if you're overweight trying to lose weight, that's it's not the end of the world. Whereas someone like you or I, who is a healthy body weight, wants to take that, I think it could just because, well, again, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I believe that metformin, for example, works on the molecule AMPK, which is the adenosine monophosphate kinase that the job of that is to add phosphate groups onto adenosine monophosphate, creating an adenosine di and adenosine triphosphate. And so if I was to take that, I don't really feel like I want anything messing with my AMPK. And that could, I don't know. Again, this is speculative, but I just feel like there could be some side effect that is going to impact the way that my body maintains its own energy. Something that I would recommend somebody just because they want to be healthy goes and takes, metformin. But if your doctor's recommended to you, I don't hold that against anyone at all. I don't think it's cheating. Or I mean, I don't know if you can get down that rabbit hole there, but if it's going to help you lose weight, that's probably the best thing you can do.
That's something really solid. Ben, let's move on towards nutrient absorption and gut health.
I'd like to take a quick break and thank the sponsors of today's episode. Now, unfortunately, I'm kidding. I don't have any sponsors for this podcast. I put this podcast on with my own time and my own money as just a part of my desire to spread high quality information about nutrition and exercise. That being said, if I do ever have sponsors one day, I will assure that they are the highest quality, good products that I genuinely enjoy and use myself. Also, there are some ways that you could be a supporter of this podcast. Some terrific zero-cost ways that you can support this podcast is to subscribe to or follow the show on whatever platform you listen on. On Apple and Spotify podcast, you can leave a rating on the show up to 5 stars. And on YouTube, you can like the video and leave comments, asking questions or engaging. I know that all creators kind of ask you to do these same things, but it really does help show the algorithms that people are enjoying the things that they are learning on this podcast and that it should push it out to more people. You can also share the episode directly with a friend or family member that you think might enjoy it. All these things really do help the podcast grow, and I would be very appreciative if you took the time to do any of them. I do also offer nutrition and exercise coaching that is personalized to you and based on the scientific principles that I teach in this episode. Of course, that is a for-cost way to support this podcast, but if that is something you are interested in, you can contact me in a variety of ways, which will be found in the show notes. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, okay.
What are the basic fundamentals of digestion? Like, from where does it start? Where does it end? And yeah, the enzymes that aid in digestion and stuff.
Yeah, well, so your digestion, of course, starts in your mouth, like chemically, though. Of course, when you chew something up, your saliva helps make it easier to swallow as you chew it up and grind it, with your teeth. But there are chemicals even in your saliva called amylase and lipase, and their job is to break down carbohydrates and lipids. Something actually you can do. It's not as tasty as it sounds. It's actually a little bit gross. But if anyone wanted to try, you could take like a starch, like a cracker or a bread, and if you just put it in your mouth and you chew on it for a long, long time without swallowing it, then that salivary amylase is going to actually break down some of those starches into sugars that are going to taste sweet on your tongue. Now, it's not the sweet that you're probably used to, is why I say it's probably going to be not as tasty as you think it is. But chemically, it starts in the mouth, goes down, of course, through the esophagus into the stomach. And then the stomach has 3 different layers of muscles on it that all like cross different ways, so that when they squeeze the stomach in all sorts of different directions to, make sure that the stomach acid and the chemicals in the stomach acid all get mixed well with that. Proteins, again, as we've talked about several times now, there are these long chains of amino acids, and when they're exposed to heat, as well as when they're exposed to acid, they denature. And so that means that they're easier to break apart. They so proteins, excuse me, I should explain a little more even. It's they're these big long chains, but that's their primary structure. And then after that, they twist and they fold. And usually when you're working with this protein, you actually have this chain that's like wound into this tight ball. And so the denaturation of that protein is basically that ball turning back into this very, very long chain. And when it does that, it's exposed more so to the enzymes that are going to cleave that protein apart into individual amino acids. And so that's very, very important, function of the stomach acid. There are certain chemicals like pepsin and pepsinogen in the stomach. Again, we could get into a lot of words that nobody's ever heard of, but they're just going to help break apart the proteins. And there's something called intrinsic factor,
Yeah.
which was studied by a scientist a long time ago, that is important for the absorption and activation of vitamin B12, cyanocobalamin. I believe, I don't remember the scientist's name, but he did some research. Basically, there are these people, experiencing these weird symptoms that he believed to be associated with um, vitamin B12. And he believed it to be something inside, intrinsic, he called it, inside the stomach, that activated this vitamin B12. And to prove it, what he actually did is he had somebody, this was gross, so get ready, but he had somebody who did not experience these deficiency symptoms chew up a piece of meat, swallow it, and then throw it back up, so that his intrinsic factor in his stomach could have activated this vitamin B12, and then he fed the food to the person without the intrinsic factor who had these deficiency symptoms. And then that person no longer had the deficiency symptoms because the vitamin B12 had been activated by the other person's stomach, which is disgusting. But yeah, the stomach just plays a huge role, the acidity and activation and denaturation, breaking apart of all these molecules. And then you go through the small intestines. There's the different portions of the small intestines, lots of um, as stuff goes into the small intestine, the pancreas is going to release insulin, which is what helps shuttle glucose to the cells. And it's going to let out sodium bicarbonate, which is going to neutralize the stomach acid so that it doesn't burn a hole through the small intestine. The small intestine is a tube, and then on the walls of that tube are little fingers called villi. And then on the fingers, even the villi, there's even more fingers that go all around the villi called microvilli, so that there is a huge, huge, huge amount of surface area for the food to be absorbed in. And then as it makes it all the way through the small intestine, again, in the stomach had 3 layers of muscles that contracted. The intestines have 2. And so the 2 layers of the intestine, the first one is just going to be to kind of crunch it up. But then the second one is going to be the peristalsis motion, which is just what squeezes it along the tube. And then finally, when you get into your large intestine or your colon, that is really going to be where we talk about the gut microbiome, which is something that, again, I'm not super expert on it, but I'd love to talk about it with you if you'd like. And then in the small intestine, or sorry, in the large intestine, excuse me, the large intestine is going to absorb a lot of water from the food that we eat, so that we can get a lot of the water that we use to help digest the food. And then, of course, it's going to lead to the feces being disposed into the rectum. But then, as well as the large intestine is going to help with the absorption of electrolytes as well. Sodium and potassium are absorbed in the large intestine. And that's your crash course.
That's more than a crash course. Oh dear Lord. Beautiful. Now, all right. This is something that is this interests me a lot, and I think it might be interesting to you as well. Now, for me, um digestion, nutrition are always preceded by hunger, and hunger is physical, emotional, psychological, neurological, and
Yeah.
come with
Yep.
me. Can you tell me about the neurological control of hunger? Because, like you've been mentioning about enzymes and hormones, and there's gonna be more hormones and enzymes over there.
Yeah. Well, this is something, I feel um like Andrew Huberman or something
Oh
probably
dear
has an
Lord.
episode about this, the psychological and the neurological factors that drive hunger. And so if you really want to get into this, I'm sure there's a big long podcast about that. However, one thing that I do know is simply that when a food tastes good, there's a dopamine response to that food. And again, in today's modern world, that can be bad because it's going to that dopamine response. A lot of people think of dopamine as like addiction and just like lustful behavior, but really what it is, it's a motivating thing. And so when dopamine is released, you're motivated to pursue it again. And so for somebody who eats a Twinkie from the gas station, the dopamine is going to motivate them to go back to the gas station and get another Twinkie. However, back in the day, right, hundreds of years ago, if you worked really, really hard on your farm, or if you worked really, really hard to go hunting and you had this really, really yummy meal, the dopamine there is going to drive you to go back out and hunt again, because it's probably pretty tricky to do that, right? However, that dopamine response is going to be what sort of helps you motivate you to keep on doing those behaviors that lead to that outcome that is good for you, leads to you actually getting to eat food. And then we know that, like we've talked about, there are certain hormones in the digestive tract that are going to signal to your stomach to turn on and to turn off, as well as when you get to a certain blood glucose level. If your blood glucose gets low, there are certain hormones as well. Namely, ghrelin is going to be a hormone that is released that causes feelings of hunger to get you to eat again. As you talk about, just neurological factors that control your hunger and your appetite. Really, the only thing that comes to my mind is that dopamine response encouraging you to eat. I'm sure there's more that I don't know about, but there's that I know of that is going to lead you to just have this craving and desire to do the work to get a food.
Got it. Got it. No, you actually touched the right spots. You've mentioned ghrelin though. So, Ben, tell me about the gut, especially the gut microbiome for starters. Like, what exactly is the gut microbiome?
Yeah, well, biome, for those who know, is basically a place where lots of different organisms live and interact with each other. And so the microbiome is this mini biome inside of your large intestine. And it gets that name because there are millions and billions of bacteria that live there. And to many people, that's probably going to be a little scary sounding, right? But it's very, very beneficial. And well, they have a tremendous amount of purposes that they fill. Things like serotonin. This is kind of a fact that has become kind of mainstream and popular now, but serotonin is synthesized in the gut. So if you have a healthier gut microbiome, then you are going to be perhaps happier, right? Because serotonin is synthesized in the gut. But really, it just affects your whole digestive tract. Like the pH of your digestive tract is going to affect your utilization of this food. And the speed at which the food moves through your digestive tract is going to affect the way that you utilize the food that you're eating. And the health of these bacteria is greatly going to affect that. And really, what we can do to encourage a healthy gut microbiome, if I could just give you one piece of advice, is to eat fiber. Fiber is something called a prebiotic. And what that does is it helps feed the bacteria because they need food to be able to replicate and grow. Probiotics are very popular, and I think they can have some important use. Things like yogurt and kimchi and kombucha are these fermented foods that are considered probiotics, as well as you can buy pill form probiotics. And that probiotic is going to be the bacteria itself. You're eating the bacteria so that when it gets to your large intestine, that bacteria can kind of take hold and contribute to your microbiome. And like I said, that can be good. However, like when we were talking about the antioxidants, some people will consume lycopene because they know it's an antioxidant. Whereas I wouldn't recommend that. Just consume the tomato because there could be stuff we don't even know. And so that's the thing, like a probiotic. Some people like, oh, I'm consuming this lactobacillus probiotic because it's good for me. It's like, well, what if there's dozens of micro or like bacteria species in your gut that we don't even know about? Let's just feed them and let them grow and multiply and divide so that the population increases rather than just trying to increase the population of just one.
Interesting. I mean, like, rather than having like a lactobacillus infusion or something, I don't know, whatever it is, just have some curd rather. That's just my
Yeah.
personal POV over there. And yeah, like you said, we don't know what we would be missing out. And same is the case with antioxidants because the research over there is very in its nascent stages.
Uh-huh.
But since you've mentioned prebiotics and probiotics, uh, three things: prebiotics, postbiotics, and probiotics. Can you tell me exactly like how they function differently from each other? Like, why was the classification important in the first place?
Yeah. So again, prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. So we've talked about prebiotics. That's really fiber. Now there's soluble and there's insoluble fiber, and that has to do with whether or not it's able to pull water into the digestive system and mix with water, and that kind of adds bulk to the stool. It helps the food move through the digestive system easier, reducing the risk of colon cancer. And however, there's in addition to the soluble and insoluble fiber, there is fermentable and non-fermentable fiber. And well, usually the insoluble fiber is going to be fermentable. So it gets into the large intestine, and then that is what the bacteria are able to eat and ferment and use as food to grow. That is a prebiotic. Prebiotic is a food for the bacteria. Probiotic is the bacteria itself. If you're consuming a probiotic, you are trying to consume the food itself so that, or sorry, the bacteria itself in food so that that bacteria can then take hold in your gut. However, the last one, the postbiotic, is actually one that might be actually if you're looking for supplements, just because I know that there are so many people who are, right? Everyone kind of wants that quick and easy fix, that pill they can take to get all the fix to their problems. This might actually be the most prudent one, right? A postbiotic is a product of the bacteria. So again, things like butyrate, hydroxymethylbutyric acid is another thing that it's been you can hear it as, but that can have great impacts on health and on muscle proteins. So there are these certain compounds that have been identified that are the byproducts of the fermentation that these probiotics do. So if you're feeding these bacteria with fiber, then they could create these byproducts that are beneficial and desirable to you, and that would be considered a postbiotic. So rather than you could take a postbiotic, which is just like you'd take like a butyrate supplement.
Tell me something. Can these probiotics, prebiotics, they improve? Can they like actually improve nutrient absorption?
Most of the nutrient absorption is going to take place prior to the large intestine,
Okay.
um, with the exception of we talked about water and electrolytes are going to
Yeah.
be absorbed in the large intestine. However, as you're talking about vitamins and minerals and carbs and proteins, amino acids and fats, really all of that is going to take place in the small intestine. So I mean, it's very, very good to have a healthy gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome in your large intestine can absolutely affect. Again, we talked about like the pH and things of your whole, intestinal system. And so, yes, I think a healthy gut microbiome is going to be very, very indicative of a healthy GI tract, and a healthy GI tract is going to lead to better utilization of the food that you eat. However, the majority of the gut microbiome is in the large intestine, and not much absorption of nutrients happens in the large intestine. So maybe not in a huge way.
Got it. Now, are there any specific foods that could improve both, like, uh, gut health and the nutrient status in the human body? I mean, like absorption of nutrients and gut health.
Yeah. Well, I'll just go ahead and start with gut health because that's kind of the train that we're on right now.
Yeah.
But fiber. It's hard to eat too much fiber. Fiber is really, really good for you and kind of hard to come by depending on the thing. So I love oats and oatmeal.
Yeah.
Oatmeal is a great source of fiber, has a decent amount of protein in it too. It's a whole grain. Oatmeal is a great food that you could eat to, um, feed the bacteria in your gut microbiome, as well as it's going to help with your motility, which is the movement of food, reduce the risk of colon cancer. So fiber. My favorite sources of fiber are, probably oats and broccoli. Oats are tastier than broccoli, though, to many people. But as you talk about the absorption of nutrients, vitamin C probably is going to be the best example that I can think of. Just because, well, we know that spinach is a great example. This is something that you learn about. Um, in spinach, there are things like iron,
Yeah.
and that's a very, very desirable thing for your body to absorb and get. However, it is going to be ferric iron and not ferrous iron because it doesn't come from a meat source. And so you want some sort of a vitamin C to, convert that ferric iron to ferrous iron. However, um, spinach also has things called oxalates in it. And those oxalates are going to bind to the iron and prevent it from making it past the small intestine into the bloodstream. And so if you're trying to get all of your iron from spinach, you might need to get higher than, the recommended daily allowance because you might not even be getting it all. And so if you're consuming it with something like vitamin C, that can definitely help in that regard. Um, I know that just acid in general is going to help antagonize that oxalate binding to the iron, so that can help as well. But then there is actually certain competitions. So I've mentioned before that there's certain doors and certain transporters that get different nutrients through, a cell and a membrane. And so, for example, like with the minerals is a great example because, calcium and iron and magnesium, they can all kind of compete for these same transporters. So if you have one, if you take like this, you have a supplement routine, say that you're trying to get all of your vitamins and minerals from supplements and you consume them all at the same time, you're going to have all these different minerals competing for a spot on that same transporter, and so you're going to kind of lose out on some of that benefit. And that could also be an implication for why it might be better to eat more meals throughout the day rather than just one big meal at night. Because you intermittent fasted, it could be better to consume 3 balanced meals throughout the day so that there's a higher likelihood that you're absorbing all of these nutrients that you hope to. Then as we, I don't know, talk about probiotic foods, really it's fermented food. And so that is going to be yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. Those are really the ones that I think are most popular.
Yeah.
And I think there's great anecdotal evidence at the very least that those things can help you feel better. And some people, feel like they have less gas and GI distress when they consume those things, perhaps because there's, a better gut microbiome. Um, Aside from that, do you know of any other fermented foods that you enjoy eating? Those are the four that I can think of.
So in the southern portion of the country, we've got the local name over there is idli. It's basically it's basically a steamed pancake made up of
Okay.
lentils, and the batter of it is fermented. It has got some fermentation in it, and that is something which is super beneficial for the intestine. And
Yeah.
also, the batter is used to make like a couple of things.
Uh-huh.
So all of those things, they are like really really good for the gut in general, plus digestion. And that is something that I really like about like the diversity of the food, plus
Yeah.
anything else in general. Have you ever had fermented meat?
No, I have not.
You should try.
It sounds, I don't know if I'd like it. Maybe a
Nasty.
little putrid, yeah.
Yeah.
You made me think of something as you talked about that food. I don't remember the name. I
Idli.
apologize, but that you
IDLI.
mentioned, idli. All
Yeah.
right. Well, something that should be kept in mind: sourdough bread, for example, is fermented. When you have your sourdough. However, something that might be important to understand is that you fermented the dough of the sourdough, and that's what gives it its sour flavor, the acidity and everything of that. However, if you bake that sourdough for a long time in high heats, that bacteria is probably not going to survive, at
Absolutely not.
least like a vast majority. And so, you know, I am not very familiar, but I've heard, all sorts of claim benefits of sourdough. I've even heard that, the fermentation process can kind of change the composure of the starches, which could be good. And again, I need to do more research before I speak on that. I've heard of benefits. However, though there are going to be, probiotics in that sourdough when it is a dough, after you've baked it at 400 degrees in, a hot oven, that bacteria is probably not survived.
I think we need to ask a baker or maybe like a food scientist. All right, Ben, moving on to lifestyle, which I believe I really need to change mine. Tell me something about chronic stress. How does chronic stress actually affect nutrient requirements? Like, for example, like I am in a state of, I'm a little anxious, all right, or maybe like I'm a little worked out, and as when we were talking, when we prepared for this, I also did mention that that working out as well is like it's basically it puts like a huge amount of physical and mental and emotional stress on the human body.
Yeah.
What do you think, how does chronic stress affect nutrient requirements, both in terms of when you're working out, in general, everything?
Yeah. I'm not I think there's actually a very important distinction to be made between those two types of stress, like anxiety stress versus, stress that you've applied to yourself in terms of exercise and things like that. Um, as you are exercising, you do have a greater need for um, energy for fuel. So I'd say primarily carbohydrates is the best, form of fuel, but then also protein, right? The more that you are, working, the more tools and building blocks your body's going to need to recover from that exercise. So as you are imposing stress on yourself, you need to eat more, right? You need more fuel. And so that's very important to understand, it's different, like, if you're running because you're trying to lose weight, like, if you're doing it as a matter of caloric expenditure, then obviously you don't necessarily need to fuel that because your hope is to use your body fat and your extra adipose tissue as fuel. However, if you are training for a race or if you're training for some goal, you need to fuel that, right? Because if you train fueled, you're going to train better and incur a better, stimulus on your muscles and on your heart and on your lungs. So, as you are imposing stress on yourself, if you really want that stress to pay off, to be beneficial, and to lead to desirable adaptations made within your body, you need to fuel that. And that's a very important way. In terms of anxiety and sort of, psychological stress, I suppose, I'm not really aware of any ways that it like changes your need for nutrients. However, I do know, many people stress eat, right? And well, the reason for that is because eating can actually activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So, for those who don't know, there's two branches of your nervous system, which is your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. And it's not sympathy as in you have sympathy for your friend when something sad happens, right? But one of them is fight or flight, and that is sympathetic, and the other one is parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. And the way that I always remember it is that parasympathetic is like you're in paradise. So you're going to be relaxed and happy when you're in paradise, and your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest nervous system. And so as you chew and as you swallow, it's actually going to activate, I think, like your vagus nerve can even
Yeah.
be activated as you digest and as you swallow. When you chew, your brain is going to be put at ease. So, fun little trick actually is um, I love rock climbing. I did it, probably a lot more when I was in high school than I do now. But one trick that you can do is if you're ever like on a rock climb that's really, really high, or if it's really, really hard, if you actually just like chew gum, it's actually going to help your body turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, because when you're eating, your body feels safe, your body
Yeah.
feels relaxed, and so it doesn't feel the need to be scared so much. So you're still in this scary situation, but sometimes, it can be bad if you get up, on a high rock climb or something, and then you're just like paralyzed with fear. You're not going to make good decisions and you're not going to make good progress. So if you just chew gum, you can actually, be more relaxed. And in that regard, people stress eat because it helps them feel relaxed and it helps them feel calm. And so that can, of course, lead to an excess consumption of calories, which can lead to bad health outcomes. So, really, finding a way to manage your stress can be incredibly beneficial in that regard, as well as the more stressed you are, if your sympathetic nervous system is on, well, one of the main characteristics of that is that your body is releasing adrenaline. That is your sort of fight or flight that gives you energy and strength to get away from danger, for example. However, one thing that adrenaline does is it vasoconstricts. It makes your blood vessels smaller and tighter, which increases your blood pressure. And so, if you have chronic stress, then you might have chronically high blood pressure. That's actually why, we observe people who practice religion and people who read and people who are married, and have good relationships. They live longer. And well, why is that? Well, in a big way, it's likely to be because of the lack of chronic stress. They have better blood pressure and things like that. That cascades, down your health. There's less oxidative stress that we've already talked about. You're going to age better and slower and be healthier as you go along.
Now, when humans advance in age, when they grow old, they influence nutrient utilization.
As you age, there are some important, physiological changes that happen that can affect the way that you digest and the way you utilize nutrients. Primarily, we've talked about intrinsic factor that activates vitamin B12 briefly, and well, as you age, your production of intrinsic factor goes down, which is actually why the vitamin B12 injection was um, introduced. Now, the vitamin B12 shot is kind of marketed now towards people who give it out. We know that vitamin B12 is great for your metabolism and for your energy breakdown. And so sometimes they market it to people who don't need it because they lead them to believe that it's going to lead to an incredible increase in their performance and in their health and the way they feel. But depending on your age, especially, you probably don't need that as much as you just need to get it in your diet. And then even if you do get into that old age and your intrinsic factor goes down, if you just consume more of it in supplement form, there's a higher likelihood that what you do eat is going to be activated, ingested, and utilized. The other thing you mentioned is fiber. So something very very common for elderly folks to do is to eat their prunes and drink their prune juice,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is fiber. So I mentioned the word is motility is the motion of food through the digestive tract. And as you get older, your motility slows down. And so, of the many benefits of fiber, I've mentioned how, the more fiber you eat, there's more bulk to, your stool, and there's more bulk to that food bolus that's moving through your digestive tract. There's more water. The more water is in your digestive tract, the faster it's going to move in. So fiber can be really, really beneficial in that way. In fact, that's how many laxatives work,
Yeah.
actually, is they pull water into the digestive tract. And when it's very, very watery, it moves very, very fast, and then that can help you pass your
Yeah.
stool that you've been struggling to pass, that laxative. And so that's an important distinction to make as well. When you get older, your digestive system slows down, which can be good. We mentioned sometimes you want a slow digestion of food, so that way, like, you don't have this high increase of carbohydrates that aren't able to be fully utilized, and then are stored as fat. Um, of course, calories equated, that wouldn't have any long-term impact on the way that you store body fat, right? Because calories in, calories out. However, a very slow digestion and you can sort of think as like a drip of carbs into your bloodstream could be very desirable. However, if it gets too slow, it's going to lead to things like constipation. And if it's too slow, it could lead to things like colon cancer, both of which you're a high risk of cancer in your old age already, just because, primarily oxidative stress and things. And so you need to be very mindful of that as well. Um, and then, well, aside from that, it's really kind of all I'm thinking of. It could be very beneficial as well for elderly folks to consume a higher amount of protein, just because the decline of muscle tissue happens very naturally. It's kind of uncontrollable, and Well, anything you can do to stop that is going to be very, very, very beneficial. And what comes to mind is a study I'm aware of that has been done, and this was not done on elderly people per se, but it was done on morbidly obese patients. So they were considering going in for bariatric, gastric bypass surgery, and they rather were recruited to the study where they ate a very, very low calorie diet. It was like 1,200 calories a day. Which, if anyone has tried to eat 1,200 calories a day, it's almost like you're not even eating. You're just having a couple snacks throughout the day, and just letting your body fat take care of the rest. But the distinction in the study, they had two groups. They were both on that isocaloric diet. However, one group had a very high consumption of protein, and the other one did not. Now, when you're eating 1,200 calories as well, it's if you're going to have a high consumption of protein, you're pretty much only consuming protein, right? So probably half or more of their calories they consumed were from things like whey protein shakes. However, as they monitored the weight loss of these two groups, the group that consumed a high protein diet lost very, very little muscle tissue. I think it was like 4 or 5%, which is like incredible. Like that's a great number of fat or of muscle tissue to lose.
Hmm.
It's very, very low. Now, of course, the more obese you are and the more fat that you have to lose, the less likely you are to lose lean tissue because there's just so much fat tissue readily available to be utilized. However, the other group that did not consume a high calorie diet, I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like 25% of the weight that they lost was lean mass. And so there was no difference, in the protein diets. And so just the higher protein that you consume, we can definitely equate that into your old age, right? As you age and you consume more protein, you're more likely to hold on to that muscle tissue.
That's actually very interesting. You know how lean mass tends to stay on. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's actually really interesting. And I honestly feel like, more people should be like, pushing their parents into having protein.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like in India, our diets, they are not protein rich at all. Our diets do not contain protein at all. It's
Huh.
it's it's like a very small portion of my diet would have protein. Unless and until I'm like, adding in non-vegetarian food, unless and until I'm adding chicken or whatever I'm adding to it.
Yeah.
And I know for a matter of fact how difficult it was for me to like, get my parents and everybody else, like onto the protein bandwagon that
Uh-huh.
we start
Yeah.
having it. All right, tell me, how does a sedentary lifestyle affect blood sugar handling and, of course, nutrient partitioning?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a big way, blood sugar is very readily available, right? Glucose is how your body wants to create energy. So even like glycogen is stored in your muscles and in your liver. However, glycogen is this long chain of glucose, and before glycogen can be utilized, though it's like the body's preferred, storage mechanism, it has to be broken down into glucose. So blood glucose is very, very rapidly available for use by your body. Now, if you're sedentary, well, you're not using glucose, right? Now, the distinction, what was very important to understand is that as it relates to especially type 2 diabetes basically comes around by the fact that um, glucose wants to make it into the cell, especially, the ideal glucose level in the body is between 80 milligrams per deciliter and 120 milligrams per deciliter. And, if it gets much higher than that, then your body wants to release insulin to shuttle that glucose into the cells. However, the cells can only hold so much. And so if you have excess glucose in the blood, and then all of the cells are pretty much full of glucose, well, there's really nowhere for it to go. So what'll happen is that the pancreas will just keep sending insulin and keep sending insulin and keep sending insulin to try and get that glucose in. And basically, it gets to the point where the cells don't really recognize insulin as a signal to absorb glucose anymore. So in type 2 diabetes, your cells have basically become insulin resistant. Well, that's exactly what insulin resistance is, right? That's a term that's thrown all over the place, right? Your cells have become resistant to the signaling of insulin just because they're already full, so they can't hold anymore. And so if you're just as you are moving around, as you lead an active lifestyle, you're making room for glucose. Now, the other thing that's important to understand is that if you have a like a larger lean tissue, if you have a larger frame, if you resistance train and you grow bigger muscles, well, what have you done now? You've added more receptacles for glucose. So, if each cell can hold however much glucose before it's full, if you want to better manage your glucose, you can either use up the glucose that's in those cells to make room, or you can add more cells. And then
Got
that's
it.
going to make room just the same.
Got it. So, for example, all right, I'm talking I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
I know that. I mean, for example, I know that the next 1 week, all right, is something where is some period of time where I won't be moving too much, where I will be like
Okay.
sedentary for a while, where I will just be glued to my laptop, sitting on my desk. Is there,
Yeah.
according to you, like what changes to my diet should I make?
That's a really good question and a valuable thing to think about. I like the sentiment of trying to plan ahead so that you can kind of take control of your diet in that way. Um, I that's kind of hard to think about. I mean, really, you just need to eat less, right?
Okay.
And I think that the way you structure your day's eating could kind of affect that. So, for example, many people, many bodybuilders and powerlifters, at least that I know, kind of have a pre-workout meal scheduled, right? It's a meal that they eat before they go to the gym. If they don't go to the gym, they don't need to eat the pre-workout meal. And that could be just a beneficial way to set up that, your eating habits. So that way it kind of controls the way that you are eating. And so you kind of manage your calorie intake when your output is lower. However, I think it's important to note that, how tall are you, Akash?
I am 196 centimeters, 6'5" almost.
6'5". Holy cow. And how much do you weigh?
110 kilos, 240,
240.
I
So
guess. Yeah.
depending on your activity level, right, and everything, it's going to change. But let's just say you might burn probably 3,500 calories in a
Yeah.
day. Does that sound about right? And
Yeah.
so, well, of that 3,500 calories, of course, this depends. Like if you're a marathon runner, a big portion of that calorie burn is going to be from exercise,
Yeah.
right? But let's say, I mean, you probably train weights and you go on a walk. Maybe of that 3,500, probably about 500 calories, it comes from exercise.
Hmm.
It's really not a huge portion
No, it's
of
not.
your
Yeah.
daily energy expenditure. And then of that remaining 3,000, probably 2,000 or 2,500 calories comes from your basal metabolic rate. And that is, from everything that is happening from your digestion and your diaphragm contracting to have you breathe and your heart beating to move blood around and the production of enzymes that all takes energy to do. And, everything going on in your body. If you just laid in bed all day, you'd still probably burn 2,500 calories. There's also the thermic effect of food,
Yeah.
and then there's non-exercise activity, or even if you are just sitting on your laptop, you're gonna be, typing and moving your head. At the end of the day, that kind of adds up. So really what I'm hoping to get at and hoping to mention here is that it's good to be mindful of how much food you're eating if you have a time of sedentary you have a sedentary week ahead of you and you know that. However, if you have a good amount of lean tissue like you do, if you're tall and things like that, it's probably not going to be as big of a difference as you think. It's not that, I usually eat 3,000 calories a day and now this next week I'm going to be kind of sedentary so I'm going to eat 1,500 calories a day. It's not like that at all. You don't need to plan this big change, but probably setting up your eating habits in a way where you kind of have meals in conjunction with your training that you can skip out on if you're missing that training, I think would be a prudent recommendation.
Got it. Since we've been talking about food, tell me something. Processed versus whole foods. It's something that you mentioned as well earlier in the podcast. Uh, is there a considerable difference in the micronutrient content of both micro or macro or whatever it might be?
No, not in general. I think there probably is a little bit of a bias, or I shouldn't say bias. I'm sorry. There probably is a small difference in the micronutrient content of
Okay.
organics. However, really what it's going to come down to is the way the food is farmed. So I just know in the world today, a lot of crops now are kind of like mass produced in these big fields. And so after a couple, generations, if you're not replenishing the soil with, fertilizers and nutrients, then that crop is just going to run out. And so maybe this crop and this food that traditionally has this micronutrient, if it's not in the soil, it's not going to be found in the sunflower. And I think that, if you're buying like organic produce in America, at least from like a farmer's market, someone's home growing this organic produce, well, it's not necessarily the organic aspect that is going to lead to it being more micronutrient dense. However, the more micronutrient dense foods that you can get because of the way they were farmed tend to be organic.
So I have been, like thinking about that. Organic food is a little better than processed food in general, but also the
Yeah.
whole
Uh-huh.
idea, like you're saying, right, that how it is farmed. Processed food generally tends to have like a little bit of more. Say, for example, it would have,
Uh-huh.
it would be a little more genetically modified, maybe, and more amount of
Yeah.
additives, herbicides, pesticides, whatever it was, whatever it might be. So yeah, I have kind of pushed myself over to the organic side, but yeah, yet to see
Yeah.
considerable and noticeable differences over there. Um, Now you've mentioned fruits a lot. Uh,
Uh-huh.
how important is seasonality whenever we're talking about fruits and vegetables?
I would go as far as to say, if I had to really pick a side, that seasonality doesn't matter at all
Okay.
to fruits and vegetables. And that's a topic of debate that I've seen a lot. Some people will say, if a fruit's not in season, like don't eat it. It's terrible. But really, if a fruit's not in season, it's not going to grow. And like what is the seasonality? Like an apple doesn't know if it's March or if it's August, right? And so, like, if you're able to replicate the conditions to where a fruit would like to grow in a greenhouse or anything like that, I don't think the month that it was harvested really has any effect on the nutrient quality, especially because in first world countries, at least in America, I know really the issue is just getting people to eat the fruits and vegetables, right? And so if you tell someone that this fruit is bad because it's not in season, you're just adding these hurdles that they need to get over to consume fruits and vegetables, which is bad. We don't want to add hurdles. We want to take them away so that these healthy foods become more accessible. Now, the argument that I'll acknowledge for the counter side is that, I mentioned things like oxalates in
Yeah.
spinach can kind of, affect with the nutrient absorption of iron, for example. Well, the argument and the idea is that when a fruit or a vegetable is not in season, there's going to be a higher presence of these compounds. The fruit's not going to be able to ripen properly, and so there could be, like acids, or people are worried about like chloroform is found in seeds, for
Hmm.
example, and they're worried that some of those harmful, compounds could make it into the fruit. And I understand the desire to be cautious in that regard. However, to my knowledge, we haven't observed any, perpetuated health outcomes negatively that have come from, eating fruit out of their supposed season. And really, even if there was some, it appears that the benefits you get from eating fruit when fruit's not typically in season are going to outweigh whatever benefits are going to outweigh whatever harm might come from eating the out of season fruit.
Interesting. And what do you think about, like, so right now you're talking about fruit that is like, uh, being grown in greenhouses, maybe. What do you think about fruit that has been stored in cold storages for a while?
Like frozen, or how do you mean?
Like, say, for example, like India exports a lot of apples. Now, for
Uh-huh.
example, like, the apple takes like 3 days to reach Italy, but it has been it has been like, stored in like cold storages. Say, for example, like,
Yeah.
minus 35, where nothing can happen to it. And then it is like,
Yeah, uh-huh.
it's stored over there as well in the same at the same temperature. And then when the season of apples is over, that's when like, they break it out. They break those apples out and that's when they have them.
A fun fact for many people is that frozen produce is actually a lot of times going to be more micronutrient dense than fresh produce. Sometimes people will think that, frozen produce is kind of the cheap produce and it's low quality, and in efforts to be more healthy, they're going to consume fresh produce. However, the thing about frozen produce is that when they know it's going to be frozen, right? And so they pick it at peak ripeness and then they flash freeze it instantly, right away. And so cold temperatures do a really good job of maintaining vitamins. Now, first of all, there's commentary on the destruction of vitamins and minerals in food. And the one distinction I want to make is that you cannot destroy a mineral, right? Because minerals are literally like they're found on the periodic table. You look at the periodic table there, it can't be broken down anymore, right? So heat and UV light, it's not going to turn your iron into something that's not iron. That's impossible. However, vitamins are these complex chemical structures. So vitamins are the things that can be destroyed by heat and UV light are going to be the primary drivers of this. So frozen produce does a really, really good job at maintaining its nutritional quality because it is being bagged. It's away from UV light. Oftentimes it's in a freezer, right? Well, it's going to be in a freezer away
Yeah.
from UV light. And then it's not going to get hot. And so stuff that is stored in the heat and exposed to the sunlight, that is more likely to be, the vitamins in there could potentially break down, be destroyed, and it might not be as micronutrient dense. And so the implications for that, the longer it's stored before you eat it, the more likely that is to happen, right? And so stuff that is not well taken care of, stuff that is exposed to excess UV light, and there's distinctions. Not all of the vitamins are going to be destroyed by UV light. Not all of them are going to be destroyed at all. And off the top of my head, I don't remember those distinctions, but it's not that they're not all equally susceptible
Yeah.
to these reactions. However, in that regard, if that's something you're worried about, I would actually highly recommend frozen produce.
Got it. All right. Moving on to the next section, which is long-term health and prevention. Uh, which nutrient deficiencies are most strongly linked to age-related decline? What do you think about that?
I feel like this is a topic we kind of have hit on in some ways already. And
Yeah.
again, the first thing that comes to my mind is vitamin E,
Okay.
right? The one that's very um, vitamin E is very protective of the phospholipid bilayer that makes up the cell membrane,
Hmm.
protects it from free radicals. And so, again, as a lot of people think about aging, what do they think about is your wrinkly face. And so, if you have lots of vitamin E that is able to protect your cell membranes
Yeah.
from those free radicals and help you maintain healthier skin, vitamin E is the first thing that comes to my mind. Now, in a sense, that is very cosmetic, and wrinkles standardly are not going to cause like a huge difference in your total overall health. However, we know that the skin is a very important organ that I think a lot of people don't give it credit for.
Absolutely.
Like if you get toxins or anything on your skin does a great job in absorbing what needs to be absorbed and excreting and blocking from your body the things that need to be avoided, right? If you didn't have your skin, you would die a terrible, painful sickness very, very quickly. And so, there could also be some health outcomes. Maybe if you have poor skin health because it's been so attacked by free radicals or for whatever other reason, maybe you're more susceptible to things like colds and viruses. So vitamin E comes to mind. In the rest, we mentioned how when you get older, your needs for vitamin B12 are going to increase because your body's not as good at absorbing it anymore. As well as I think there could be implications, and this is speculative. I just want to get that out of the way, but we've talked about how vitamin A plays an important role in
Absolutely.
the health and the cell replication of your eyes and your brain and your spinal cord. So I don't have a strong link that I can point you to, but out of speculation, I believe that if you had a higher consumption of vitamin A, then it's likely that you could have, a healthier brain and eyes and spinal cord, which could help with your movement and, of course, just your cognitive abilities as you move into your old age.
Got it. Um, so, can early diet choices in your 20s and 30s, can they influence how you age in the 60s and 70s? Like building up like good habits, good dietary
Yeah,
habits.
of course. Absolutely. So habits kind of speak for themselves. Habits are totally, I mean, if you have good habits at whatever age, those are going to move on, and that's kind of even different. But um as we talk about chronic disease and the development of things like stroke and even, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and those things like that, um the reason many people don't seem to worry about them, they don't think it's going to happen to them, and they don't really care to do the things that prevent them, just because these are diseases that develop over a lifetime. There were in a class that I took a couple semesters ago about chronic disease, they shared a story about how in the Vietnam War in the 1960s, I
Yeah,
believe it was. I don't know much about US history. I just know a lot about nutrition. But in the Vietnam War, they had, unfortunately, tragically, many, many young men were dying in the battlefield. But they did autopsies on many of these young men, and they found actually signs of the development of plaque in the arteries, signs of like early onset of, cardiovascular
atherosclerosis. Yeah,
disease and stroke. Yeah, exactly. Atherosclerosis. And so it wasn't at a serious enough level where these young men were going to have a heart attack in their 20s, but you could see that it was already developing. And so these are diseases that develop over your lifetime. And so it's like I said, it's hard for people to try and be passionate about the prevention of chronic disease because you don't really see the rewards of it for a long, long time, for decades. However, can lifestyle choices in your 20s and 30s slow the progression of these diseases? Absolutely. Absolutely.
got it. How can diet help maintain muscle mass in older adults without heavy training? Or does it have an
Yeah,
impact or
well,
not?
uh-huh. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. Now, um, your body has sort of a tier list of what tissues are most important to it, right? Now, we've already discussed that study I mentioned to you. The people who consume higher protein lose less muscle mass.
Yeah,
And so we've already discussed that, and hopefully we understand that well. However, this is, sort of a personification of your body that's not totally accurate, but bear with me. Your body has this tier list of the things that are most important to it. So, right, what's the most important thing to your body is your brain. And then after your brain, it's probably like your heart and lungs and your kidneys. And then it just goes down your intestines and your bones. And then at the very bottom, the very, very bottom is your fat tissue. So the least important tissue to your body is your fat tissue. And then after that, probably comes muscle tissue, or at the very least, I'm not going to try and name where exactly muscle tissue lies on that scale. But what I can tell you for sure is that your heart and your lungs and your brain are way more important to your body than your muscles are.
yeah,
And so if you are not consuming enough protein, if you're not having the diet that you're supposed to be having or that you should have for your best health, if you need amino acids for the sake of the maintenance and the health of your heart and your lungs and your brain, well, then your body is going to break down your muscle tissue so that it can utilize the amino acids that make up that muscle tissue for your heart
yeah,
and for your lungs. And so that's actually why many bodybuilders, for example, when they're on a caloric deficit trying to get ready to step on a bodybuilding stage, they will consume L-glutamine. Now, glutamine doesn't really play a huge role in muscle. So why are bodybuilders taking it? Well, the reason for that is because it does play a big role in the health of your organs. And so if your organs have all of the amino acids that they need, you're going to be far less likely to need to break down your muscle tissue. So your question was, can your nutrition affect the way that your body breaks down muscle as you age? Yes. There's a lot more stress and your body needs to upkeep your heart and your lung, all your vital organs. And if you're eating well enough to provide the tools to your organs that you need, your body's not going to feel the need to take those tools away from the muscle, but they will if they need to.
Got it. Uh, Within this question, tell me something. How much should be like the percentage of protein be? I mean, like, how to calculate protein for somebody, say, for example, like who's 60 or 65 years old, all right, not working out, but their muscle mass needs to be preserved. What would you do in that case?
Yeah. Well, your protein needs should go up as you age, just for the sake of protecting the muscles and protecting the human body against breakdown. The protein guidelines that are recommended at a very bare minimum is 0.8 grams of protein per day per kilogram of body weight. Now, I weigh about 100 kilograms. You said you weigh about 110. So for us, that's 80 grams and 88 grams of protein a day. That's not very much. And however, that number was set. They did a big series of studies where they examined the amount of protein measured by nitrogen balance lost from the body in a day. And so that level of protein, the 0.8 grams per kilograms, is only for the sake of making up for the protein that you've lost in a day. That is your bare minimum value. What I like to see much more from people is 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram. Um, I like to think in terms of pounds just because I'm in America.
I
And
mean,
in
don't worry.
America, that's
Please
probably going to
continue
be,
with pounds. I'll put in the subtitles.
yeah, it's okay. Well, thank you. In America, that's about 3/4 to 1 gram per pound of body weight that you weigh. It seems to me that when you exceed 1 gram per pound, or that's about 2.2 grams per kilogram, past that point, it seems that you're kind of like you might be wasting a little bit of money. You could be eating a little bit more carbs. Like there some benefit, yeah, but it's the what is it? The reduction of, oh, I can't even remember it. It's the I don't know. Basically, you kind of plateau out. There's a term
Yeah.
for it that I can't. It slips my mind, but basically, maybe there's a benefit, but you need to do so much more inputs to get
Hmm.
that benefit out that it's probably not worth it, right? So for me, that's a good number, is a gram per pound or 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. However, some things to understand is that the more that you eat, so like the more total calories that you're eating in a day, the less protein you actually need to eat. So the reason for that is because carbohydrates are protein sparing. So if you're having lots of carbohydrates in your diet, and if you're eating at your maintenance calories, then your body is going to be able to use the carbs for energy. Whereas if you're in a steep deficit, if you're not eating very many carbohydrates, your body is struggling to make quick energy. It might then start to use your dietary protein intake for energy, and so that is going to increase your need to consume protein. However, if you're eating at maintenance calories and you have more carbs, you might not need to eat that 2.2 grams per kilogram. You could probably do like 1.5. um, However, I also know that it's common for, elderly individuals to have less of an appetite as well. So if someone in their old age was really, really passionate about trying to be as healthy as they could, or if someone is going into old age and they want to stave off whatever disease they can, I would recommend 2.2 grams per kilogram of their body weight, or, gram per pound. However, what I'd really just like to see from people to maintain their muscle mass and to maintain their health is 1.5 grams per kilo.
Got it. Got it.
And that's going to be about 0.7 grams per pound.
Per pound. Yeah. Interesting. Does the nutrient balance that like humans have in general, does it influence the risk of chronic diseases like diabetes in general, diabetes or maybe thyroid?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm not exactly sure about thyroid, actually. I can't think of any link between excess body weight and thyroid health. However, one thing we've mentioned is that the heavier you are, the more oxidative stress your body goes through.
Yeah.
And the more stress you go through, the higher your risk for diseases. The other thing is that, of course, we know that it increases your blood pressure. and it increases your blood cholesterol. And, LDL cholesterol, the transporter
Hmm.
of any saturated fats, if that is in the blood too long, that can be oxidized and that can damage the lining of the blood vessels, leading to atherosclerosis, which of course is very bad negative health outcome. And so, yeah, overweight and obesity really, really affects your lifestyle. But the other ways is just simply that if you have high blood glucose, if you have high blood cholesterol, then the osmolality of your blood has increased. And so that is the amount of, substances dissolved into your blood. There's more lipids and there's more sugar and there's more, of these bad things, which can then lead to an increase in blood pressure, which then, leads to extra stress on the cell walls. And really, atherosclerosis is the big killer because that's what's going to occlude or fully close a blood vessel, leading to the brain, which can lead to stroke, as well as leading to the heart, which can lead to ischemia or death of the heart cells.
But yeah. Anyways, moving on. So, can maintaining an optimal nutrient status improve cognitive health and memory?
Yeah, and well, I wish I could cite a study I'd read or something to give you a definitive answer. I think that there's very, very strong possibility that the answer is yes, and I'm sure that there is some scientific outcome that has kind of demonstrated that. Again, we know that when we're feeding the body well, it has all the tools that it needs. Again, I've mentioned vitamin A
Yeah.
as a possible link to improved brain health. One thing that I would mention here is your omega-3 fatty acids. Now, omega 3s are an example of a polyunsaturated fat molecule, and um, they contain linoleic acid, which is just very, very, very important for the development of the brain. In fact, in prenatal vitamins, so as a woman is trying to get pregnant, she is encouraged to take a prenatal vitamin supplement. And usually, what a prenatal vitamin is the only difference between it is that it's basically like a normal adult health multivitamin, but then it has an added amount of folate, which is important in cell division. So it helps the fetus's brain develop properly, but also is it has omega 3s because in the formation of the brain and the spinal cord of that infant in the mother's womb, it's going to need a high amount of omega 3s. And so those are kind of the two most important things for pregnant mothers is folate and omega 3s. And the benefits of omega 3 extend to everybody, right? Everybody is encouraged to eat fatty fish or to take, um, fish oil supplements if you have them, and and access to them. They can be very, very beneficial. In fact, I mean, there's countless supplements for sale out there. But if I had to, recommend a supplement to anybody, yeah, like there's benefit to taking a vitamin D supplement. And there's benefit to taking a vitamin B supplement. And there's benefit to taking a vitamin K supplement. Like you can do these things. However, the most important supplements for you to take, aside from like a whey protein powder, in my opinion, is creatine and then fish oil.
Interesting.
Those are going to
Okay.
be the big drivers. Yeah. If you can get all of your omega 3s from, like eating salmon and things, that's
Yeah.
great. But I mean, personally, some people don't have access to salmon, right,
Hmm.
in many parts of the world. But also, like, I'm too poor to afford salmon, right? I can't eat that every day in the portions that I would need to eat, my recommended daily allowance of omega 3s. So supplementation of fish oil is very, very prudent.
Got it. While we're on the topic of omega 3s, there is also something known as, I believe, EPA and DHA.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Let's see if I can remember those. I don't know. Yeah, they're very, very chemical sounding names. DHA is like docosahexaenoic acid, and then EPA is like epipentahexaenoic acid, or I don't know, something like that. Like the names really don't mean anything, but those are the components of fish oil. Those are the two fatty acids that you're going to be getting from fish oil. When you know EPA and DHA are kind of one and the same with fish oil. If you're saying you're taking a fish oil supplement, you're taking EPA and DHA. Now, you can be mindful of, I know that different fish oils that come from different fishes are going to contain different amounts, and that's something that you can check. And I will say, the supplement industry is pretty unregulated. So it is possible for some supplement to sell you a fish oil, an oil that comes from fish
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily contain the EPA and the DHA.
Yeah, that can also happen. But yes. Uh, so every single supplement that I'll order, which will have like fish oil, will have EPA and
Mhm.
DHA in particular concentrations, but it'll have them both, right?
Yeah. It
So
should. It should.
yeah,
Unless it's a cheap supplement, but supplements, if they have nothing to hide, they won't hide it, right?
yeah,
In fact, if a supplement is good quality, it's going to want to advertise it to you. So, if you look on the label of a supplement and it's telling you that it has like some blend of different nutrients, that's a red flag. A proprietary blend of these ingredients, that's a bad sign
yeah,
because it's not transparent of them. They're allowed to say that, but it's not transparent. Like if they had a certain amount of milligrams of EPA and DHA, then they would want to tell you that because it would be a good product. However, if it's like, oh, it's a fish oil blend that contains some amount of EPA and DHA, but it doesn't really tell you the amount of each, then I wouldn't recommend that at all because what's the point in not telling you how much unless you don't want them to know, right?
absolutely.
So look at your labels, find a high quality supplement. I will never buy a supplement that is not third party tested.
Okay.
All right, third party. So that's somebody. The two parties, of course, are the person selling the supplement, and then you as the consumer. The third party is just a different company. The supplement company has to pay that third party company to run tests on their supplement, and then that third party company verifies the label. And so it also tests usually for banned substances, for toxic substances like mercury and lead are not things that you want in your supplements at all. And you don't have there's no requirement for third party testing in nutritional supplements. In medicine, there are regulations. You can't sell it if it's not but in supplements, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so personally, I I will never buy a supplement that's not third party tested. That's not necessarily to say that something that is not third party tested is always bad,
Hmm.
but I will never buy a supplement that hasn't been third party tested.
The stories I can tell you about adulteration, they are, oh dear Lord. So
Yeah.
one is an entire industry that that from where we guys buy, right? Like you've got your GMCs, you've got your
Uh-huh.
GATs of the world, and the big pharma, whatever the big muscles and shit. In India, what
Yeah.
happens is that the trainers over here, they would get the repurposed 5 pounder jar, all right,
Yeah.
which would have like, say for example, 2 pounds of whey protein in it.
Yeah.
Then they would add like maybe half a pound of wheat or something.
Huh.
Yeah, it does not end over here. Then they would mix like the gram flour,
Huh.
uh, because even that has got like decent amount of protein in, but it's majorly classified as a carbohydrate source. And
Right. Of course.
then they would add Dynabol.
Oh, no way. They add
Yeah.
Dianabol to their whey protein?
So the gym trainers would do that, and then they would sell it for cheap versus like for example,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Huh.
So for example, like if like a 5 pounder would be like around $50 for comparison over here, 50 or
Yeah.
55, then whatever this
Uh-huh.
guy is giving would be for like 30 or $35. It's giving you,
Wow.
yeah. So so adulteration is not just happening like at the top. It is also happening like all across the stratas of bodybuilding, and I'm sure in some places in Europe also this happens. Like you remember like how you and I were talking about Ronnie Coleman and him not and him having like 6 daughters, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I mean, like this is how steroids are introduced into the male body, just not without them knowing. Um, can be via the use of, for example, say, what do you call it, your whey protein and stuff, but also at the very same time, like your plastics and everything, they are another territory. But yes, this is also how it is happening. All right, we're gonna go on to the last two questions. Tell me, Ben,
All
are there
right.
specific longevity nutrients that science correctly is recognizing as important?
Longevity nutrients.
Yeah, anything that you think of that that you would want to put a finger on.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. Again, I feel like this is kind of a question that we've touched on a little bit, like what can we do to age better and
Yeah.
what can we do to, maintain our health into old age.
Hmm.
As we talk about longevity, again, as I've said, the things that come to my mind are vitamin E for your skin health.
Got it.
Vitamin E helps for collagen production for your skin and hair and your joint health. Of course, joint health is a big topic as people get into old age. So vitamin C for the sake of collagen production be very, very beneficial in that regard. I speculate that vitamin A could have a good impact on your brain health as you get into your old age as well. And lastly, just I mean anything that is going to um, give you a positive outcome, like magnesium for sleep and iron, so that you can exercise better and longer. You have better endurance. That is going to better exercise helps you live longer and yeah, I mean, we know, I mean, just having a well-balanced diet, every diet, right? Every vitamin and mineral is going to um, improve your health in some way. And like I've mentioned, that's one of the definitions of a vitamin. There have actually been certain compounds that have been considered to be vitamins before, but then it was recognized that they were not essential for human health. And so they were declassified as vitamins. And so, I mean, every single vitamin, if you're not getting it, you're going to have some negative health outcome. Every
Absolutely.
single mineral is going to play some role in your body's ability to create some enzyme, create some hormone, help you sleep better, help you metabolize nutrients better, help you have stronger bones as you're getting better calcium and phosphorus. I'd say, yeah, calcium and phosphorus and vitamin D. That could be an example of a good longevity nutrient, right? Because what happens as people age is their bone mineral density decreases. They fall and they break bones, which can be immobilizing and pretty deadly sometimes as well. So, I mean, those are just a couple things that come to mind. There's no one ultimate secret hack longevity nutrient that I have, but I mean, every single one of them play an important purpose. And when you have a well balanced diet, you're going to see the benefits of that.
Got it. All right. Last question of the evening. Is protein intake equally important for men and women over the age of 40? 40 is just an arbitrary number, though.
Yeah. Sorry, are you hoping to make the distinction of men versus women in this
Yes.
question? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There are some minor nutritional differences for men and women, but really in a broad way, it's largely the same. So for a long time, actually, in like nutritional and in exercise science, in the studies that we would perform, there was a noted underrepresentation of women in the science. These resistance training studies and these fasting studies and all these different things were only done on men. And so many women, well, it was applauded, and it is to this day still applauded when scientists do research on women to see those distinctions. However, the more research is being done on women, the more we realize that everything's kind of the same. The resistance training that makes a guy bigger and stronger makes a woman bigger and stronger. And the vitamins that are good for a man to eat are good for a woman to eat. Now, some distinctions that I can think of is, of course, during pregnancy and breastfeeding, a
Yeah.
woman's nutritional needs increase drastically because she's providing all of her nutrients for herself and the baby. Um, Calcium, for example, is a big component of breast milk that the growing baby needs to grow its bones. And as a woman, if you're not consuming enough calcium and phosphorus for your baby, then your body is going to pull calcium and phosphorus out of your bones. It's going to be to your detriment. The baby's going to get all the calcium and the phosphorus that they need, but your body's going to pull it from your bones, which can be bad for you. When a woman is menstruating, she has a higher need for iron because she has this, monthly period of blood loss, right? And so she's going to need to increase her iron consumption. For that reason, many women are have symptoms of anemia. They don't have sufficient blood iron, and so they can be, lightheaded and low on energy in certain cases. Um, Women are more likely to experience osteoporosis in their old age, postmenopausal, because of, well, I'm not exactly sure of the mechanism, but I know that something to do with the decrease in estrogen that they experience is very, very conducive to a lack of bone mineral density, which is very, very bad. So again, calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D could be very, very, um, indicated for these older women. However, especially as you've mentioned, past the age of 40, you said that's an arbitrary number, but as you get past your 40s and especially your 50s, women have entered menopause on average, right?
Yeah.
And so at that point, especially as they're no longer going to be able to get pregnant, they're no longer menstruating, the nutritional needs are largely the same. I've mentioned the indications for calcium and phosphorus and vitamin D for bone health. Actually, unrelated to nutrition, but one of the most important things that a woman can do to prevent osteoporosis is simply to resistance train. The stress that is put on the bones
Yeah.
increase their calcification and their mineralization. And but yeah, I mean, largely and in many, many ways, the nutritional needs for men and women are the same. Traditionally, men are larger than women, so usually they need more calories and they need more protein. But again, that's a function of body weight, and so traditionally they're bigger and they weigh more. But all the values, for example, we talked about protein, we talk about it in kilograms. And so, if you're 100 kilos or if you're 60 kilos, that's the value that you need to use. And for men and women, that's largely the same.
Got it. Perfect. Ben, it has been a lovely and wonderful 3 hours over here with you. And
Yeah, this has been great.
yeah, and I would love to have, maybe sometime in the future, I would love to have another conversation with you on strength training rather this time.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. I hope this is a productive conversation that many people
Absolutely.
can gain some value from. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today between me and Dr. Sehgal. Like I said, I really enjoyed this conversation that we had, and I hope that you guys were able to get some value out of it. If you enjoyed today's episode and the things that you're learning in this podcast, again, there are some wonderful ways that you can support this podcast by liking, rating the show. If you have any comments, suggestions of things that you would like me to cover in future episodes of the show, please leave them in the comment section on YouTube. I do read all the comments. Again, I do also offer nutrition and exercise coaching as a for-cost way to support the show if that is something you're interested in. I thank you for joining me on today's episode. This has been The Science of Sports Performance.